right. Welcome, everyone, to the ToreSays show. And today is the 15th of September. And I have a special guest with me today that I will be bringing on. This is the Middle East edition. And first, before we get to my guest, I want us to listen to Mike Pompeo yesterday, where he was talking about Obama and Biden's appeasement of Iran. And I did not discuss with my guest what we're going to be talking about today. Both of us are, I think he is more in other areas, better versed in the politics in Iran, having been a writer for the IRGC. So I will be playing this clip now so we can listen to it, and I will introduce you to my guests. So please enjoy.
Iran is denying an unnerving report that it is plotting to kill our U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Lana Marks. The report says the regime is looking for a way to avenge the death of Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in a U.S. airstrike back in January. Marks has few known links to Iran, if any, but the intelligence report does cite her close friendship with President Trump. Joining me now with reaction to that and also his trip over the weekend to the Taliban-Afghan peace talks is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, just back from Qatar. How real is that threat to Lana Marks, and what is the State Department doing to protect her?
So, Martha, I can't comment on the intelligence, but I'll say this. The Islamic Republic of Iran is engaged in assassination efforts all across the world. They've assassinated people in Europe and in other parts of the world. We take these kind of allegations seriously. We'll do everything that's within our means to protect any one of our State Department officials, the same way we do for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And we make very clear to the Islamic Republic of Iran that this kind of activity, attacking any American, any place, at any time, whether it's an American diplomat, an ambassador, or one of our service members, is completely unacceptable.
I mean, everyone has horrific memories of what happened in Benghazi. Is there any reason to think that there are other ambassadors on their list?
You know, Martha, I'm always on guard with respect to the team that works for me. One of my first things I do every morning is get a security update from all across the world. It's a dangerous world out there. We do an enormous amount of work to protect our people. And we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and they've conducted this kind of assassination before. Yep. We're doing everything we can to keep everyone safe.
Let me ask you this, because we also learned that Ambassador Terry Branstad is going to be leaving his post in China. What more can you tell us about why that is? That was a bit of a surprise.
Oh, goodness. Terry has served the president and me and the State Department team in an unbelievable way for these past years. He's done yeoman's work helping us deliver on something that's a complete change from what any administration has done with respect to the Chinese Communist Party. So I sent a note last night. I was thanking Terry. It's something he's been thinking about for a while. I think he wants to come home, go back to Iowa, and do the kinds of things he was doing back there before. I thank Terry for his service. I know his team will pick up the march in his absence.
So nothing more to it than that, because I know there was an op-ed that he wanted to run in the Chinese newspaper, which they refused to run. Any indication that any of those things are part of his reasoning?
Yeah, no, I don't think that had anything to do with it. Although I will say the fact that the Chinese Communist Party denied Terry the chance to put a simple op-ed explaining U.S. policy to the people of China, I think it's very telling about that society.
So obviously we are in the middle of campaign season, and Joe Biden has come out to talk about the Trump-Pompeo policy towards China. He says that there's a smarter way to be, with regard to Iran, I should say. He says there's a smarter way to be tough on Iran. 5 years ago, Iran was a bad regional actor requiring active deterrence and pushback. Since Trump took office, Iran or its proxies have killed 2 American service members, a U.S. contractor, have severely injured more than 100 U.S. troops, damaged Saudi oil facilities, and disabled commercial ships transiting the Gulf. Your response to him, sir?
Well, he's only right about one thing there. He's right that 5 years ago, Iran was a bad actor. They've been a bad actor for 40 years. The sad state is that the previous administration chose appeasement as the model to respond to them. They wrote them big checks. They took plane loads of cash. They gave them the capacity to continue to grow their terror campaign. President Trump took a completely different direction. He said, you're not going to get a nuclear weapon, and you're not going to get American taxpayer money, and you're not going to conduct commerce around the world to build out your capacity to threaten via Hezbollah or Shia militias in Iraq. We've taken a serious bite out of the Islamic Republic of Iran's regime and their power. We'll continue to do that.
Just a quick item with regard to the assassination or the execution killing, I should say, over the weekend of the wrestler Navid Afkari, which the president had requested clemency for him. Could the administration have done anything differently there, A? And B, what is the administration doing to get Europe to be tougher on these human rights abuses along with us?
Martha, I don't think there's much more we could do. The president spoke to the Iranian leadership publicly. We communicated to them privately, asking them not to execute someone who had engaged in simple protests of Iranian policy in the way that we would expect every human being to have the right to do any place in the world. We urge the Europeans to take these same kinds of threats to human rights seriously. In just now 32 days, the Iranians will be able to buy and sell weapons. We would urge the Europeans to join us in the effort to make sure that the arms embargo, the one that Vice President Biden and his team negotiated, that expires in just now a month. Yeah. Iran will be able to buy and sell weapons. That's what the Iran nuclear deal they put in place. That's the policy of the Obama-Biden administration. We're not going to do that, and we hope the Europeans will join us in that. I think everyone understands that Iran with more weapons is a bad thing for the world.
Yeah, but are you getting anywhere with the Europeans?
They agree with us that it's a bad idea. They're just so wedded to the nuclear deal that they can't find a way to help us make sure that those weapons don't flow to Iran in just 30 days. I'm confident, though, that the United States will be successful in a week. The snapback will have taken effect, and Iran will once again be prohibited from trafficking arms.
So with regard to the Taliban peace talks, which you just returned from over the weekend, a lot of people look at that situation and look at the Taliban trying to come to the table with the Afghanistan government, and they say, why would they give up their safe harbor for terrorists? Why would they, agree to peace with the Afghan government? And once we've announced that our troops will eventually leave there, what impetus is there for them to abide by any of this agreement, Secretary?
So, Martha, it was a really momentous day. 3 administrations had tried to create that moment where the Afghans sat across from each other at the table and began to have serious conversation about what the Afghan government ought to look like, what reconciliation ought to look like. They've been fighting themselves for 40 years. We've been there for 19. It's time for peace. I think every Afghan recognizes that, whether they're in the north or in the south, that they're part of the Afghan coalition or part of the Taliban. They recognize that the military solution to this isn't at hand. It's been near stalemate for years now. And so we're hopeful. We're hopeful that there can be an accommodation, a reconciliation that brings Afghanistan the opportunity to once again build out their economy, build out opportunity, and protect the human rights of every Afghan citizen. It was a great day. It was truly historic to be there and watch these two parties that really had refused to sit in the same room together for 2 decades join in a conversation. It'll be a rocky road. It'll be contentious for all the reasons, Martha, that you highlighted. Yeah. But I'm confident that you have to take that first step towards peace.
I just wanted to make note and remind you guys that Al-Qaeda was a political party in Afghanistan, and Al-Qaeda itself, the Taliban, right? The Taliban, let's say Taliban, was the political party. The Taliban are actually seeking to have their headquarters in Qatar. And this is why Secretary Pompeo was in Qatar negotiating Afghani issues, because the Taliban want their headquarters. And it's mistakenly for me to say Al-Qaeda, only because they were revamped into that via U.S. efforts with the Russian jihad back in the day. So the Taliban was a political party that was chosen and hijacked back in the 80s in order to help with the Russian jihad. That was done with the assistance of ISI, the Pakistani intelligence. And now they are seeking to have their headquarters as a political party of Afghanistan in Qatar, which is dubious in itself, but if we want peace, we have to figure out how we're going to minimize this.
so that we can ultimately get our
back in
forces out.
2014, as a member of the House Select Intelligence Committee, you argued against the drawdown of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. You said it had been a huge mistake in Iraq and criticized President Obama for wanting to do it in Afghanistan. So why is it not a huge mistake now? Because we will not have access to the kind of intelligence on the ground that we have always needed there.
Martha, I'm confident that President Trump's twin missions, one, to get our folks back home, second, to make sure that we can continue to fight terror in Afghanistan, make sure it doesn't come to the homeland, will accomplish those. President Trump wants to do that. There are fewer than 200 al-Qaeda left inside of Afghanistan. Times are different than they were 6 years ago or 10 years ago. It's time we can accomplish the mission of protecting the homeland with a much smaller footprint inside of Afghanistan. And you see the same thing. We took down the caliphate in Syria and in Iraq. It's time we can reduce our physical presence on the ground there and still perform the counterterrorism mission that keeps Americans safe.
So Nancy Pelosi said this about the deals that have been made between Bahrain and Israel for recognition and the UAE and Israel for the same recognition. Listen to this.
We've been waiting for a very long time for the president's proposal for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement that honored the two-state solution. It still hasn't come. Good for him for having a distraction on a day when the numbers of people who are affected and the numbers of people who are dying from this virus only increases.
She says good for him for having a distraction, is what she refers to that deal as.
So cynical. That's a remarkable accomplishment. The administration and President Trump have set the conditions for peace in the Middle East. There's real progress that tomorrow we'll have the Israelis, the Bahrainis, the Emiratis all in Washington to sign agreements, normalizing relationships amongst the countries. It's a great day. I remember Secretary Kerry saying that if the nuclear deal was abandoned, that Israel would become more isolated, when in fact just the opposite has now happened. They've joined hands and now they have many more partners across the region. Each of those countries, those Gulf states, recognize that the shared threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran is very, very real. And now they are working together, building out security and economic relationships and real ties between these countries. It'll be truly stabilizing for the Middle East to see what happens tomorrow in Washington, D.C.
When will Saudi Arabia be on board in those deals, do you think? How close is Saudi Arabia to being on board?
I am confident that there are many other countries that will follow what we see tomorrow. The timing is indeterminate. We'll see. I hope it's soon.
All right. Last question before I let you go. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this personal blowback at you and Mrs. Pompeo over the resumption of the dinners that you hold at the State Department during COVID, and also these emails about asking State Department employees to help with personal Christmas cards. Why is that okay? And why is that okay on both counts?
Yeah, everything we've done was for the betterment of the State Department. It was lawful and appropriate. We'll continue to do that. We're going to continue hosting guests here at the State Department to have people have serious conversations about American foreign policy, benefiting the people of the United States of America. I'm proud of what we've done. The fact that they're picking on my wife, who has done yeoman's work as a volunteer to try and make life better for every officer at the State Department, I find pathetic and sad. But we'll keep doing the right thing. We'll keep obeying the law. We'll keep doing everything that's proper. And we'll leave the State Department a better place than we found it when our time here is done. Some of the
pushback on the dinners is that nobody's wearing a mask there. President Trump gets the same kind of pushback for the rallies. Just a quick thought on that before we go.
We will comply with every instruction from the State Department medical team. We'll be safe and we'll have a great set of meetings and conversations.
Secretary Pompeo, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good to see
Martha.
you, sir.
Have a good evening, ma'am.
You too. Thank you very much.
All right. So that was Secretary Pompeo giving us the 411. Before I introduce my guest, I just wanted to tell you guys that Iran has actually put in a lawsuit that they launched in the World Court against the United States. And Reuters covered that. I will drop the link within the chat for you guys to see. And we have just submitted our objections to that. And going back to having a world court hold us accountable, pretty interesting, considering that we are a free nation and no one should ever give that sovereignty away and power for other nations to sanction another. That is, in order for someone to have power over you and have any judicial commentary over you means that you have forfeited part of your sovereignty to them to allow them to oversee you. So this is a very big deal. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to someone. And his name is Buff Perry. He has worn many hats, like many of us that work in the shadows. And he's worn the hat of a professor. He's retired now. He's written for the IRGC. He was an intelligence advisor, one might say. He's retired right now, but he still does contracting work. Buff, welcome to the ToreSays show. Please say hello to my audience and introduce yourself.
Hello. Good morning from my perspective here in Mountain Time. I'm Buff Perry. I'm sorry I missed your piece on Mike Pompeo. It was completely blank, but nevertheless, maybe in the discussion and exchanges, we can fill that in a little bit, whatever it was he had to say.
Oh, you couldn't hear it? Great. More technical issues. See, this is what happens when you call outside the United States.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I'm ready to get on with it.
So basically, I'll tell you
where do we start?
Yeah.
I know you've mentioned a number of areas. Appeasement of Iran it particularly interests me, and I would need to be filled in a little bit on that one, if it's possible.
Yeah. So basically, here's the thing. The Taliban. I was explaining to my audience, and I've been doing it for a couple of years now, that they're actually a political party in Afghanistan. And the concern here is that they have requested and demanded that their headquarters, even though they're a political party in Afghanistan, be centered in Qatar. Now, we know that the past summer, President Trump was attempting to have the Qataris and the representatives of the Taliban meet with him and come together to some form of resolution about this. And, this is the third meeting, and Pompeo was in Qatar having these discussions. But at the same time, Iran put out, supposedly, news are saying this, right, that Iran is allegedly targeting and planning to kill or assassinate the ambassador of the U.S. that's located in South Africa. And, that's pretty interesting, considering we know now that the United Nations and Interpol have shifted their headquarters to South Africa. So, so that's basically what the news is, as well as, Iran weeks ago had submitted a lawsuit to the World Court against the United States. And that's kind of weird because next month, the sanctions on Iran actually having weapons expires. So that means they can buy weapons and trade. So that's the political climate right now from what the mainstream media is saying. But, mainstream media is all controlled information. So I thought, what better conversation to have now is to talk about Iran. I mean, how do you see Iran moving forward? Because before, as Pompeo said, it seems like the previous administration was appeasing Iran. I mean, that's the narrative, right? We all know they were in bed together. And I just wanted you to give people a historical context on it, since you have written for the IRGC before.
Okay. Touching on this issue, given that Iran has such an extensive border in the Persian Gulf, or what the Arabs would prefer to call the Arabian Gulf, this issue of the Taliban headquarters in Qatar is extremely interesting. Qatar has always been the odd man out amongst its neighbors, with the Emirates and Bahrain and so on. Qatar has never been a trusted entity, by Saudi Arabia, which is in effect, governed by the same ruling family that Bahrain is. which is in and of itself extremely interesting and controversial because they have Shiite majorities in places like Bahrain, but not in Saudi so much. That the Taliban end up with their headquarters in Qatar, the odd man out in that particular neighborhood, is really fascinating to me. And how and why that happened, I think, may have everything to do with Qatar's tenuous relationships with its neighbors. That said, Iran in the Persian Gulf, and it really, all of this boils down to the Persian Gulf. Once had as one of its provinces Bahrain. Bahrain has a population of Shiites and Sunnis, but a large population of Shiites. The ruling government of Bahrain is an extension of the royal family of Saudi Arabia, and they're all Sunnis. So we have situations where Sunnis in minority are governing larger Shiite populations. That is a volatile situation. If America is expecting stability because of recent agreements, I think it would be wise to think and rethink and try think whatever the final decisions have been and may still be yet to come. Given that situation, the Shiites of the Persian Gulf and the Persian Gulf states are rising. And when they're governed by Sunni minorities, that is not a good horizon to be to have a lot of aspirations toward. If you're getting my picture here,
100%. 100%. I get it because I know this stuff. But you can elaborate for the audience.
Well, Iran is Shiite.
So
and despite the Machiavellian politics that seem to crop up everywhere, whatever the name of the governments are and the populations may be called by, Iran is a Shiite population. They're 90+% Shiite.
Let me play a short clip for everyone to understand the difference between Shiite and Sunni. Here we go, guys. Let's see.
It's okay if I don't hear it.
No, you'll be able to hear it. I'm just trying to get the audio working. This was actually done by NBC 4 years ago, and that was and it's okay. Very very simplified. Here we go.
So some of you may be asking, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia? And to answer that, you really have to go back to the year 632. That's the year that Prophet Muhammad died. The split between Sunnis and Shias boils down to a fight over Muhammad's successor. Sunnis thought that Muhammad's close friend, Abu Bakr, should be the next Muslim leader, and Shiites said that Muhammad had chosen his son-in-law Ali as his successor. Shia and Shiite come from the phrase Shiat Ali, which means the party of Ali. Now, the Sunnis won the fight over Muhammad's succession, and Abu Bakr became the Muslim leader, but the sectarian divides between Sunnis and Shiites, rooted in this ancient leadership battle, continues till this very day. Power battles between Sunnis and Shiites have contributed to unrest in the Middle East. In Syria, for example, the Sunni majority population has long been ruled by the Assad family, who are Alawites, or a Shia offshoot. ISIS, who is fighting against Bashar al-Assad, is Sunni. In Iraq, though, the Shiite majority felt oppressed by Saddam Hussein's dictatorial rule. He was a Sunni. Then the Shiites took over and Sunnis felt oppressed. I know it gets very confusing, but it's important to remember that there are about 1.6 billion Muslims around the world. 85% of them are Sunnis and about 15% of them are Shia. So while there is a sectarian divide, it does not preordain violence among the two groups. In fact, the overwhelming majority of Sunnis and Shias don't actually hate each other.
So I think that was a nice, concise summary right there. I just wanted to say, Buff, Turkey, right? Erdogan, where would you put his nation right now? Shiite or Sunni?
Oh, they're Sunnis. There's an eastern minority of Shia, but the vast majority of Turkey is Sunni.
Okay,
But Erdogan, is not limited by the Sunni theology and ideology. He's got aspirations to and is becoming, a recognized leader of the whole of the Middle East.
right,
And is very a very interesting leader from Iranian eyes and Iranian aspirations. The trade between the two countries is extensive. So much food that Iranians depend upon comes from Turkey.
Well, the thing is, I want people to understand. You understand, people understand Christianity has all these offshoots too, right? There were the historical Christians, Catholics, Lutherans, Protestants, whatever. There's all these little facets. Christ of Latter-day Saints, Jehovah Witnesses, they've just, Mormons. So it's the same thing in the Islam culture. The Sunnis have the Hanafis, the Hanbali, the Maliki, the Shafi, right? And then the Shias have the Ismails, the Jafari, the Zaid, and some other that are scattered. Those Shias that are other are scattered mostly within Turkey, northeastern Iran, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan. So there's like this other, others. And then there's like a super other, which I believe is Yemen. And is it Yemen? I think it's Yemen. That are the Abadi. Is it the Yemen or Oman? I keep mixing those up. One is Shafi and the other one's Ibadi. So just so you guys
talking about Sunnis now with
well there's an other. The Ibadi is like outside of Shia and Sunni. It's so bizarre if you think about it. I remember my time in Oman. I was and this is such a long time ago, where it was either Oman or Yemen where they had this more dominant outside of I think it is Oman actually, because it was the discussion of the pipeline with the UAE piping it through Iran to get to Turkey, right? So I think it was it was Oman where they have this other structure called the Ibadi. So it's that's an other outside of Sunni and Shia. It's kind of like their own kind of thing. When we have the Yemenis that have the Zaid Shia and the Shaifi, right? Because they're kind of split, in Saudi Arabia at the south western borders with Oman, where it's like they have this Zaidi Shia complex, along with obviously the Hanbali Sunnis in the region. But
Saudi Arabia's Shiite population is in the eastern province, the vast majority. There's small minorities of Shia in Saudi Arabia, in other parts of Saudi Arabia, but the dense Shiite population of Saudi Arabia is the eastern province where all the oil fields are.
Yeah.
And that's what raises a lot of flags, the oil fields and Shia population, how to contain them, how to keep them happy when it's a Sunni dominated government of Saudi Arabia. In the south, both Oman and Yemen are Sunnis. You're correct. There are some very distinct sort of breakaways in a cultural sense or sect sense, but there are still fundamentals of Islam to begin with, and then sub fundamentals of Shia and Sunni, and then sub fundamentals as you get into these sects that you're describing. including Abadis, or there's the Houthis. There are so many there in the south, and they're all very restive right now. They're on the move. The whole area is on the move, and I think the overarching issue is America or Russia or China are not going to be able to contain this situation. It is uncontainable because you think you have one under some degree of understanding and even control, and then two others pop up. That whole region is kind of, I think, settling out all of these different factions not in a controlled way, not in an organizational way. It's just happening, and they're settling it out in different ways depending on the region. Saudi Arabia is pretty ruthless about how it deals with any minority uprisings. It has it can't deal with minorities within the bounds of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is the big deal there in the western region, and Iran in the eastern region across the Persian Gulf. They're the superpowers of the area.
Yeah,
this is why Saudi wants to be nuclear and have nuclear weapons, because they think Iran's developing nuclear weapons. And I'm not saying that Iran is not wanting to develop nuclear weapons. They are. And I think the bigger overarching issues are things like this. Who are the two superpowers of the area? And what are they doing to try to contain these various minorities? Look at the Yazidis going up more northern, in the northern region, into Syria and Iraq and so forth. Look at what's happened with the Yazidis. And who are the Yazidis? They're Shia, kind of, but they're a Sufi sect. And Sufism, we haven't even mentioned as part of the whole complexity of Islam. It's the mystical, sort of contextual traditions of Islam and pre-Islamic entities throughout that region. There's vast complexities and layers and convolutions going on here. Hard to do it in an hour.
Right. No, I know. And the thing is, what I want people to imagine is a gulf is literally water that's surrounded by land. So think of the Gulf there, and I want you to see on the right side we have strong Sunni presence. The majority are Hanbali, right? And Shafi. The Sufis are, that we say on the northern strip. And then on the left, right, we have Iran, that is Jafari Shia majority, other types of Shia. And then to the south, of it, we have Maliki, which is mostly dominant the Sunni Africans, right? That's the majority. They're Maliki.
But the Maliki
Sunnis.
are one of the four Sunni sects that came right from the beginning of Islam.
So they're the ones at the boot part of Oman, Yemen, and Saudi that close up the Gulf. We have Hanbali and Maliki Sunnis, but then we have the Abadis, which are Oman, and then on the other side of Iran, we have the Hanafis, Afghanistan, Pakistan, all Sunnis. But what we do identify and we can see clearly is that we have Ismaili Shia on the borders of China, from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. All of those are, Shias now. So we have a huge, closure in this battle on the Gulf. Is that
we do? But Ismailis are so distinct as what are called the Seveners, because they started with the Seventh Imam, of the early formations of Islam. The Ismailis are Seveners. The Shia are Twelvers, because they go to the 12th Imam, who is the hidden Imam that they're expecting to come, and arise with the return of Jesus,
right,
in terms of the fundamental beliefs. So Shia and the Shia and the Ismailis are not unified at all.
No, they're not.
They're as
They're
distinct from each other as are the Shiites of Iran from the Sunnis of Saudi Arabia. They're a very distinct group, the
correct.
Ismailis.
But the key here is that it's on the northeastern and eastern border of China, where we have like dominant Sunni, right, and then we have this mass clump right on the border of Shia, Ismailis, and Jafari. Mostly in Pakistan is the Jafari, right? And
which are Twelvers.
Yes,
they're Twelvers, not Seveners like the Ismailis.
Why don't you explain the Twelvers and the Seveners? Because people need to understand, when the president tells us we're pulling out of a war that's so long, that it's an ongoing religious war that has so many years. I think people need to understand it so they understand the dynamics. Because while they're playing out these wars of who's the leader of Islam and who's not, and who's this mystical, I would say, second coming of Muhammad and all this stuff, we have a very volatile region because they're very, I would say, religious driven. So why don't you explain as best as you
can
the origin
of Shia,
yeah,
and how it broke into these branches,
mm-hmm.
and what that means in today's geopolitical arena.
Correct. That would be great because, but remember, you're speaking to people that have no idea anything about this. All they know is like there's Islam, there's radical Islam, and they hear about Sunni and Shias, and nobody really understands what that actually means.
Mm-hmm. And it does take a while. In a nutshell, that Prophet Muhammad delivered the religion of Islam. It is believed by many, if not most Muslims, that Islam pre-existed Muhammad. That the true Judaism, the true Christianity, is also part of Islam. And I'm putting "true" in quotes, as is interpreted by Islamic theologians. But Islam came to deliver the final message. This is the belief system. I'm not saying what my beliefs are here, but this is the belief system. Muhammad delivered the final message. That all the Muslims believe that. Shia, Sunni, the Sufis, they all believe that the final message of the Rasuls, a Rasul is a messenger. So of the Rasulat, the final message was brought by Prophet Muhammad, not by the Shiite descendants or Sunni caliphs that came about by way of Prophet Muhammad, but he himself was the final messenger. He was not the final prophet in theological terms. There are also prophets that could keep coming, as long as there is existence from a Muslim point of view. But he is the final messenger. So, okay, the message became solidified and concrete in the formation of the caliphate. A caliphate comes about from the word caliph. There were 4 caliphs that were in effect appointed by Prophet Muhammad, and the caliphs are those who would continue the political and to some extent religious aspects of Islam. So the 4th caliph was a man named Ali. Ali was Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law and first cousin. He married Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad. Therein is the beginning of Shia, the Shiites, and the Ismailis, who grew out of the Shiite descent, if you will. The Seventh Imam in Shia today, the Twelvers that rule Iran, is not the seventh Imam to the Ismailis. The Ishmael was another son of the sixth Imam, and he brought about a new branch that goes right straight through to what is today the 49th Imam, who's the leader of the Ismaili faith, which was at one time in history called the Fatimid Empire, that ruled all of North Africa and a huge part of the Middle East. They're called Shiites frequently, but they are an Ismaili part of Islamic history that was very, very powerful. They were defeated. They were defeated by the Sunnis across North Africa. That's why North Africa is not Ismaili any longer. But there's a huge residual in terms of archaeology and theology of that Fatimid period. Fatimid being a term named after Fatima. So already this is getting convoluted. I don't have chalkboard here in front of us.
So basically what people need to understand is back in the days, the whole north of Africa used to be Ismaili, which is Shia, and now they're majority Sunni Maliki. Right.
That's right.
And so the majority, as that little audio clip said, 85% are Sunni and the remaining are Shia and other. Right. Other is the Abadi, which are in Oman. And that's about it. So within the Sunni and the Shia, kind of like, it's almost like Christianity, right? The way
very much like Christianity is uncannily so.
Right, because we've got Lutherans, Protestants, Mormons, Catholics, the historical Christians, the Orthodox, right? And so they all spread. There's a lot of this everywhere. So for people to understand, this is a biblical war between nations that abide by a certain religion, and they're fighting to say who is in control. And then, like you said, there's like this mysterious guy. And here's where I wanted to introduce the mystery part. See, let's talk about Fethullah, right? Because I know for a fact that back in the late 70s, Barack Hussein Obama's mom, Stanley Ann Dunham, and Peter Strzok Jr.'s dad, were the ones that had trained the IRGC and installed them in Iran. And, they've been controlled opposition for a very long time. And my understanding from what I know regards to energy relations and the relationships, because for some reason, the relationship of their wars in regards to who's in charge, Sunni or Shia, right? Or Abadi, right? Because that we have to take that into account because that's all of Oman, right? They also regulate based on their interactions the petrodollar. And, Saudi Arabia does not have that much oil. For some reason, people think that Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil. And if they're pumping at the rate that they are now, in 36 years, they have no oil based on the reserves that they've discovered now. So this battle is ongoing, right? But we see that Turkey is starting to rise again in their Ottoman ways, using the leverage of the Muslim Brotherhood, sister brotherhood, right?
Which used to be a bitter enemy of the Shia rising in Iran. The Islamic Brotherhood was historically very anti-Shiite. So when the revolution happened in Iran, believe me, they were not gung ho in favor of what was going on to have a more powerful consolidated Shiite entity like the Islamic Republic of Iran. Just to keep things really clear here, and to know where the boundaries are that are theological and ideological, and that becomes really important. Sometimes for the temporal period, it's put aside so that wars can be won. But when it comes down to it, this is where the cleavages are, and this is where the really weak points are in these various Islamic revolutionary activities. And there has not been a leader who has been able to, find the means, Machiavellian and otherwise, to salve, to put the balm into these cleavages so that they heal. They're not going to heal because they're so distinct from each other that we're really talking in so many instances here about different religions, even though they're all called Islamic or Islam.
Right. But the thing is, this religion causes war. Let's not get that, the
Exactly.
Romans weaponized Christianity by using the Catholic religion as the iron fist, right? Off with their head. The Pope said so. They created a leader. They created the Catholic Church created a caliphate. Right? He is the embodiment of God's word, hence what he says goes. And we see the same thing with the Islam religion, right? Now, what I'm trying to get to is what people don't seem to understand is the Shias are mostly in Iran right now. And they are the minority, right?
No, you're not in Iran.
No, not in Iran. No. Buff.
In all of
Buff,
Islam,
yes.
in the what's called the Ummah.
Buff.
Yes, okay. You're right.
What I'm saying is they're the minority globally, and they're mostly concentrated. Well, all of Iran is Shia. Now, think of it this way: Barack Hussein Obama, right, and all the previous administrations appeased the minority because that causes that split in that religion, ergo the radicalization. So what they did was they were appeasing Iran, the minority Islam faction of the Shias, right? They were weaponizing them by pacifying them, but by being passive to their actions is what I'm trying to say. So what the previous administrations did was that they used the small minority of Islam, the Shias, to cause unrest and instability in the Middle East. That is my point. And so the only person right now that is keeping that minority group afloat globally, financially, right, because of all these sanctions, aside from the covert funding and support, like sending plane loads of cash, creating the Instex system to go around SWIFT to pay them, is Turkey. So the question is, if Turkey is, Sunni-ish, right, and they're the life support and Muslim Brotherhood too, right? It's Turkey, Qatar, Canada is where we have the Muslim Brotherhood support, right? Through those three nations. The question is, why would the Sunnis, right, of Turkey, because Turkey is assumingly Sunni, but they are strong Muslim, one of the few remaining majority Muslim Brotherhood followers. Why have they supported the Shias? Why are they supporting the Shias? Because if you stop supporting the minority that is causing the instability in the Middle East, then you don't have that many clashes, right?
Where does Turkey's food come from? It boils right down to the fundamentals. Turkey and Iran have historically been best of friends and the worst of enemies. Today, Eastern Turkey has a strong Shiite population. The trade with Iran, and there's a border we're talking about here, it lends itself to this ongoing dependency on food as a major trade item, and we're talking about essentially grain. Turkey gets a huge percentage of its food from Iran, and this is not anything new.
Right. But what I'm trying to say is that the previous administrations, including Barack Hussein Obama, had maintained and amplified the minority Shia to perpetuate the instability in the Middle East. That's the point. And not
Well,
only that, China has aided in it by, the borders, the eastern border, western, and I say eastern, the western borders of China. All the nations that align and hit the western border of China are all Shias too. So
no, they're not.
yes, they are.
No, the majority of the Muslims in China are
Not
Sunni.
China. I'm saying the nations that border it. We're talking North India, Eastern Pakistan, Eastern Afghanistan, or Ismailis, predominant in Jafari too. Jafari mostly for those that are in the Eastern Bloc of Pakistan.
Okay, Jafari is you're right.
Shia.
Jafari is a sect of Shia.
Yeah.
Jafar is a very important name in terms of the 12 Imams, and so, but they're still Shiites.
Yeah, they're Shiites. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So we have, so Obama, we all know, and Brennan and some other people, went out to train in Karachi and Islamabad, right? Because that's where you get your training. I mean, passport data doesn't lie. But the question is, they have been promoting the instability by weaponizing the religion of Islam. Basically, because why would you allow the majority minority, meaning Iran, because almost 100% of Iran, excluding what I would say,
excluding they have an Arab population in the south, in the southwest
to
of Iran,
Turkmenistan.
and those are Sunnis.
Yeah, well, the north, we're talking like northeastern border of Iran to Turkmenistan, is very few are Sunni. The rest of it is all Shia of Iran.
Right.
So
right.
the
Correct,
point here is
correct.
We've got all of Shia concentrated in Iran, the actual landmass that connects Asia. Right? It's like a roadblock to Asia, isn't it? Because if you think about it, Iran is sitting right there in the middle, and to the east is the Asian continent, and to the west is access to Africa and Europe, right? That landmass, that chunk right there in the middle. We're talking map-wise, right? So they've just put a roadblock of Iran to be full of Shias, and they've been supporting it to be that blind spot for the rest of the world. This is where they do the majority of the money laundering, the terrorist activities, illegal weapons trade. I mean, why would anyone, think about it, years ago, decades ago, throw so much of the US dollar and European money into Iran to create pipelines when you know that they're the reason there's instability in that region geopolitically, right? Why would you do that? It would only be to perpetuate what? Chaos, of course, right?
Well, that and the fact that there's a high degree of ignorance about all the complexities we're right now talking about. I don't think that Barack Hussein Obama was ever up to snuff as this discussion is on the subject matter. They're pounding on my door, Tori. Can you talk with your listeners for just about a minute or less?
Of course.
I'm sorry about this.
No
I can't
worries.
stop it.
No worries. So, guys, I just want to make it simple for you. Just like in every religion, there's different factions. So the Sunni and the Shia are the majority, okay? And within the groups of Sunni and Shia, there's like different little factions too. And so we have the Sunni and the Shia. Shia are the minority, but let's say 15% of the world is Shia, and that 15% of Shia is the majority of it is located in Iran. So that means that we have had previous administrations funding that sect that causes these jihad wars and promotes instability. You get it? I hope I simplified it enough because it's important to understand.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Yeah, I heard that. That's basically what I'm trying to make it. Listen, Buff, the people that are listening to this are not well versed on Middle Eastern relations. They're not even well versed
and I understand
on
that.
Islam.
I understand
so
that.
It's really important how people understand that the Western governments have been funding the only arm of the religion of Islam that has aided in perpetuating, eons and eons of wars and jihads. So they are the reason we have instability in the Middle East, and they have been funded continuously.
A couple things come to mind. One, and remind me about Mossadegh from the 1950s in just a moment. But, you know, in American history, the relationships with Islam and its various factions go back to Thomas Jefferson. It goes back to the Barbary Coast Wars. It goes back to trying to understand what is the distinction between the Berbers of North Africa and the Arabs of North Africa by the first presidents of the United States. You know, in American history, a lot of what we're talking about is not new. It's not something that you know it's not something that in curriculum across the nation should have left out. This history of America with Islamic populations and nations, including a lot of the slaves that were brought over to America, should be incorporated in part of the curricula, you know, of school systems throughout, just so that there's a deeper knowledge. The very issue that you're discussing right now, which is the lack of knowledge that exists about all of this. There's also a lack of knowledge about the factions in Christianity in the American public. The real, you know, distinctions, like how did it really happen? Who was Martin Luther? And what was his relationship to Islam? And what did he have to say about Islam? You know, there's a history that is being ignored and needs to be studied. And then, you know, then we can talk about, well, is it right or left? Is it, you know, this or that? Just the basic history, the facts of history, not the interpretation of those facts, really is needed. And it would be so refreshing and edifying, I think, to the consciousness of the American public to, you know, to start doing that, to start digging in and looking at this history that is seen almost archaeologically, but that is living and vibrant today, not necessarily in a good way, but is, you know, it's what we're talking about right now. Because of certain aspects to the way that you know, North America developed, there really is a lack of knowledge about the relationship of this continent to the history of Islam and Islamic populations, given all the factions.
Right.
And you know, we can look at Pierre Reese. He was a contemporary of Columbus. We can look at the people who were on board Columbus's ships. We can look at Columbus himself.
Right. Well,
and his supposed Semitic, you know, history and all of that. I think a big question is what has gone wrong in the way that history has been taught and contoured and developed as a study. There's some really big gaps in all of that, and it's tragic because that is why we're having the discussion that we're having right now.
Well,
it's what's missing that we're trying to fill in.
Well, there's a lot missing, but I wanted to say, okay, so talking about politics and religion and these geopolitical wars, you and I share. I had. You know, I really like Gaddafi. I really did.
I really Gaddafi, yeah, as his own people, we used to call him secretly.
Right, but Gaddafi was you know, a visionary looking to the West a lot.
You bet.
And he was backstabbed by the Obama administration when he had done so much to help unify, I guess, create like this Pan-Africanism movement through Libya. He was rebuilding links, with Western nations in the late 90s. He was into economic reform. And then suddenly there was a Libyan civil war that we see now because of the armed Shias that started to get in there. Now, you knew Gaddafi quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been in the same room with him twice, and only once did I shake his hand. And during one of these meetings, and I liked him because he was man, he was a good person. I mean, this is the impression he gave me. And what Clinton did to him was disgusting. Because he actually was trying to create this bridge, with the African Muslim communities and nations with the Middle East, and then bring them into Europe. He didn't want everyone to constantly be in the dark. One thing I remember he said at one of the meetings that I was in is, why is the continent still dark? Right? Why is no one investing in powering Africa? And this is like, late 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Early 2000s. So it's pretty incredible. If people understand what happened there, and you knew that area very well, you've been there during this period of time. So, he was one of the first nations to, out of his own free will, no one asked, to condemn the September 11th attacks, which everybody says it's the Saudis. I'm saying it's the Pakistanis, whatever, that'll come out soon. We're having the Gitmo trials coming, and he condemned Al-Qaeda for it and gave the United States money. And, he wanted to involve his nation of Libya into the war against terror because he didn't like the radicalization of Islam within his territory of North Africa, and was urging everyone to get on the same page. So, he did so many movements to contain what has gotten out of control now, right? Back then. So would you speak to your personal experience with Gaddafi to my audience?
Well, I admired him as well, and while a lot of jokes swirled all over the place about him because he was an eccentric, to say the least. He required camel's milk over and against any other form of milk, because he was proud of his Bedouin history, which a lot of people in Libya itself laughed at. The Bedouins were, and to this day are considered kind of, ignorant peasants relative to the educated northern Libyans. Quite apart from any factions and distinctions between the Tamazight, the Amazigh people, who are the Berbers, and the Arabs and so forth, which runs deep. It still exists there, and Gaddafi had a handle on that, and he tried to soothe these distinctions with this Bedouin identity and his way of proudly professing a Bedouin mentality, which is more boundless, desert related, and so on in terms of consciousness. And it really got to that level in Libya under his rule. He was a character, a mad genius, some would say. I wouldn't go that far, but an interesting person who, for example, who took a really, really special interest in Islam in the Americas before Columbus. And that's what brought me to him and to Libya. The funding by the what's called Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyah, which was itself founded in Libya and served 72 countries. And this is the bringing to the world the word of Islam and the history of Islam and the academic and scientific side of Islam. And he thought himself to be the real leader of bringing to the world the word and the knowledge Islam as it had spread from Muhammad on through to North Africa, to Africa, how it swept across Africa, and on that point, what are we really talking about in terms of the complexion of the identities of North Africa? We're talking about a later sweep of Arabs across Berber nations, across the Berber people, who fled into the mountains, the Atlas Mountains, when the Arabs arrived. Gaddafi fancied himself an Arab, but a Bedouin Arab, and so anyway, with that, he founded Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyya, the Islamic call to Islam, and
wait, Buff, we can get into the history stuff at another time. What I want to do is demonstrate to people how the last years of turmoil that he was in led to where we are now, because it's not just the previous administrations on their own. It was the United Nations that had put Gaddafi in a box, and by what did they
you can't forget Pan Am 103.
Right. Well,
really, which is the pivotal issue.
Well, go on.
In terms of
Please,
why Gaddafi was taken out.
Please explain that to the audience, because what I want to show is, it was the United Nations that had suspended Libya from the UN Human Rights Council, right? And then they called them to the International Criminal Court, which has no authority over any nation unless you allow it. And they issued warrants for Gaddafi, because right now in Libya, what we have is we have two Libyas. We have the whole nation of Libya under the control of General Haftar and the Libyan people. And then we have Tripoli, that is owned and operated by the United Nations, the same ones that helped the Obama administration topple and trample all over Libya. So would you explain how it kicked off with the Pan Am, what you had seen, how Gaddafi was on a personal level, right? At that time, I mean, he was a visionary looking to the West, looking to modernize the nations around him. And here they are, the United Nations, quashing him like a bug. Obviously, he wanted the gold standard. He didn't want a fiat currency and all these things, right? That came into play too. But his complaint was that he was trying to bring light to the African continent. And this is why he created this Pan-African thing. He was actually a guy that was trying to create peace by way of commerce, because that is how you create peace between nations. It's not like, okay, we're going to be friends now. It's like, let's all be trading together. This is how you squash old wars, by saying, well, we are trading and we're making money and our people are happy. So maybe we should just bury the hatchet for now. And that is something that President Trump most recently, executed, Serbia, Kosovo, the whole, issue in that Balkan bloc was done through, economic agreement. And this is what we're seeing in the Middle East now. So this is where I wanted to bring it to what was happening that you had seen yourself, and how you experienced Gaddafi right before they took him out, and what happened during that time. So people understand just how, again, back to the core and the point of this whole, show today is to, amplify, and for people to understand that it was the previous government that had maintained and supported covertly and in the shadows the only faction of Islam that causes instability, that is thriving. Not to say that the Shia shouldn't exist, don't get me wrong, but if you're empowering them with weapons and the ability to covertly act against against the Sunnis, smack in the middle, that causes instability. So basically what the Obama administration was great at was perpetuating instability in the Middle Eastern region. But I wanted to take
and seeing divide and rule,
right,
as more than a tactic,
right?
And so finding those who could continue, the divisions, both sides. He toyed with both sides, and so have all the presidents who had anything to do with the Middle East. And it does go back to Thomas Jefferson once again, but we won't get into that.
Well, I wanted you to talk
Pan
about
Am 103
go. Yeah,
is an issue dear to my heart because I was in Libya during that period, and I left Libya on the day of Pan Am 103. And I'm telling you, I have an uncanny parallel relation and situation with that event. Pan Am 103 is was a plane packed with people that was taken down over Lockerbie, Scotland, and you know, I was, I think, scheduled to actually be on that flight, and I was put on another flight. And I was given a briefcase that matched exactly the briefcase that was supposed to contain the explosives for Pan Am 103. My briefcase had security tape around it, all around it, in both directions, or horizontally and vertically. If you sit the briefcase up, and I to this day I can't understand exactly why I was given my briefcase back after a fairly long stay in Libya that had these security tapes on it. But it was a Samsonite briefcase that is identical to the briefcase that was used in Pan Am 103.
Just to clarify, so the briefcase you were given with, kind of like a diplomatic briefcase, because, people that have done private contracting work do get these briefcases, right?
Yeah.
So you were given
this was the briefcase I flew to Libya with. It was taken from me. It was held for this was the period that I was there, not leaving and coming back, leaving and coming back, but the extended period that I was there. It was held. It was filled with some documents and books, and it was given back to me on the day of my departure, which was the same day of Pan Am 103. And it was given back to me with all this tape around it in horizontally and vertically, as I mentioned, and it matched exactly. It was the exact same kind of briefcase that was supposedly used by one of the two plotters and hijackers of the plane. Not my plane, but of Pan Am 103.
You were going to be on that plane, right?
You got it. And why did my briefcase match the briefcase that was used? And why all that security tape? And why was I not given the briefcase back? On the day of my departure, that had been taken from me the day of my arrival, and I never saw it during the time I was there. I wanted it because I had research materials and books in it that had to do with what my contract was about. That was a contract with Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyya, meaning in effect the government of Libya. It started in September of that year, 1988, and so I wanted to bring with me a lot of the materials I used, because I knew I was going to be giving presentations in Libya to university students, a lot of medical students who were my guides. Every time I went to Libya, I had students who were my guides and officials who were my guides, and part of Libyan intelligence and so on. Why this briefcase was held and not released to me, which is very strange, because I needed it to do the lectures, to give the presentations, and then given to me with all of this security tape in Arabic, describing that it was a security tape wrapped around it the day of my departure, which turned out to be that day in December when Pan Am 103 was taken down over Lockerbie. There's, I don't know what exactly was going on in the background, but what I do know is that Libyan intelligence was fractured even that early in 1988.
So Buff, let's move on to, right before, tell people how Gaddafi would, sleep and these little things that people don't understand, because he was eccentric. Remember, whenever he used to go to these African meetings, he would wear, more African tradition clothes, right? He was all about just bringing everyone together. So, and he was a very simple man too. He was,
he had a mansion that he didn't use, but set up a Bedouin tent in front of it where he slept. You're talking about how he slept. Where he slept, it was in his Bedouin tent, and this grand, glorious mansion that was housed by many of his officials, and where a lot of meetings, top level meetings, occurred. Here's Muammar, in his tent, and he would hold the most important meetings with heads of nations, and very important scientists and others in his tent, drinking camel's milk. And he would eat young camel veal.
It's actually quite tasty. Camel tastes good. It tastes like
ostrich. I know. I'm not mocking that.
Yeah, no, I'm saying it tastes like ostrich. It's gamey like ostrich. I actually had some of that when I was in Haifa. Actually, I ate camel.
Really?
Yeah, I ate camel in Haifa. So
kangaroo tail is the only unique Australian food I've ever had. Camel's tail.
Yeah, but
I mean kangaroo tail. Excuse me.
I remember eating it, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know what it was." They ordered the food, right? And I was like, "Oh, this is some good meat. What is it? It tasted kind of like chicken, but it was gamey chicken." And I was like, "Is this rooster?" And they just all laughed. They were like, "It's camel." I was like, "All right." So that was the first time I had camel. Yeah. I wanted people to understand.
I'm with you on Gaddafi, by the way, and I think that the way that his arrest was so gloriously celebrated on news networks was disgusting. Heads of state shouldn't be presented, to a public, to the American public or any other public, in the manner that that he was presented with his capture, or for that matter, Saddam Hussein's capture, who was ruthless. I wasn't terribly in favor of either of them, although I did like Gaddafi, like you did, for all kinds of reasons. Saddam Hussein was a different matter.
I liked his ideas, and the fact that he was one of the first Arab nations to come forward and condemn. He didn't know what happened in September 11th. He didn't care what happened. He didn't even bother. Like, are you saying it's Al Qaeda? Then war be it. Let our nation help you with this war on terror. Because that terrorism, that infighting between Sunni and Shias was tearing the North African, continent apart, and he was playing an integral part on stopping that. So, why would the Obama administration take him out?
There are so few Shiites in North Africa.
Well,
there was no nation back in Gaddafi's time. There was no nation that was Shiite in North Africa.
It wasn't, but the Malikis were taking control, and even though they're the same side faction, right, on the Sunnis,
they're Sunnis,
right, they were still infighting, right, and there were still little pockets of Shias everywhere. The thing that he was trying to do is unify the Africans. And so the question would be, when you have this nation, right, that supported our nation so much, because there were those videos where Hillary Clinton said, we came, we saw, he died, and she laughed, ha ha ha. And it's like, wait, she backstabbed him when he was trying to perpetuate unity in the region and to create some form of stability. And he was one of the biggest people that was speaking against the Shias in Iran and their factions of terror that were going into Iraq, into Turkmenistan, into other areas of the Middle East, down Saudi, Syria. He was condemning all of that, and he tried to keep the peace between the Jews and he wanted Palestine.
No, he did. He
Israel.
invited the people of Israel who had fled Libya back to Libya. the synagogues had been made into little embassies and other purposeful uses by the Libyan government. And when the Jews left, there were many Jews in Libya historically. Across North Africa, there's Mizrahi, the Sephardic Jews, and so on, who went into Spain. There were so many Jews in North Africa, and Gaddafi did have a whole program to bring Jews back from Israel who had a Libyan connection, and none rose to the occasion. I must say, I was in Libya when that happened, when that invitation occurred. Nobody was coming back to Libya from Israel, to be sure, because they didn't trust Gaddafi. But then again, Jewish Israelis don't trust Arabs in general. And that's another program. I spent a lot of time in Israel and with the Palestinians, and
because
there's a solution there.
Gaddafi was trying to kind of mend ways with Yasser Arafat. That was for the Palestinians. He was trying to get him to, hey, calm down. We can figure something out. We don't all have to keep fighting these wars. We can all just, evolve as nations. He was actually, from back in the 70s. Now, just to tidy this portion up, what I want my audience to understand is that with the fall of Gaddafi, and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State taking him out and calling that, obviously with the aid of the United Nations, right? Because it was the United Nations that helped Barack Hussein Obama and Clinton annihilate the nation of Libya. And, and I still, in my mind, don't understand why we're still funding the UN, because they're the proponents and lay the foundations for war. That is where
UNESCO was,
Islamic...
that UNESCO was funded by Libya. Mohammed Jarrari and Ali Hussein being, major intellectuals of UNESCO back in the 80s and into the 90s. A huge percentage of the money that UNESCO spent on its different programs came from Libya. Libya was a super promoter of UNESCO, right through to Gaddafi's
I understand,
death.
but what I'm saying, Buff, is that right now what people need to understand is Barack Hussein Obama, Clinton, and the UN all together assisted in annihilating Libya and increasing exponentially terrorism. At that point, this is why we saw
by taking out the person that they otherwise earlier had accused of being the kingpin of all international terrorism, Gaddafi. That is
and
interesting.
He was the one, he was the one buffering it so that it doesn't happen. And that's what's weird. What I'm trying to say to my audience is the previous administration, along with the United Nations, helped give rise exponentially to radical terrorism. They armed them, they instigated it, and they pushed it, and they dumped a lot of money into it too. So post 2011, after Gaddafi's death, what we've been seeing is nothing short of a dramatic increase in terrorism across the world, right? It's across the planet, and aiding in that instability. So the question then would be, what is your opinion, Buff? Why would a leader of the United States appease the minority Muslim faction of the Shias in Iran that caused destabilization of the Middle East, right? Also take out the only leader in that region that was trying to subdue that? What would be the benefit of it, is the question. What do you think would be the benefit for, this corrupt fourth unelected branch of government to actually perpetuate these actions and promote instability? Because that's basically what the Obama administration did, was promote instability in the region. Why would that benefit them?
Well, okay. I think I have little bit of a different take on this. Why would Obama reach out to Iran in a more general sense? Forget the specific factions. What would be the point, if not possibly, in addition to much of what you've said, all of which I don't agree, and some of which I don't agree with, and much of which I do, to reach out to Iran on the part of an American president is not a bad thing, given what happened in the 1950s with the CIA murder of Mossadegh, that set everything else in motion that we see in Iran today. Had the CIA not taken out Mossadegh, Dr. Mossadegh, you wouldn't see the Iran you see today. Mossadegh was democratically elected in Iran. Yes, he reached out to the Soviet Union, what was then the Soviet Union, and that is the excuse that American intelligence uses when this issue is ever put on the table. Why did American intelligence, officials decide that it was wise to take out Dr. Mossadegh, the democratically elected leader of Iran? What was the point? And again, the argument was that Iran was reaching out to the Soviet Union, and thought that Mossadegh was a communist, and he was accused of being a communist. So he was killed. And well, let me finish. The threatening of those oil fields in Iran, of that source of fuel, is what it's all about. If Mossadegh had not had this overture with the Soviet Union, there wouldn't have been that sense of fear and threat about, the stability of the flow of what became fuel out of Iran. But because he reached out to both the Soviet Union and wanted to have good relations with America, he was murdered. And from there develops a whole continuum of events and sequences in Iran that has produced what we can see happening today. To say that Iran was the pivotal, center of terrorism, I think what would be interesting in this conversation is to ask the question: why was Gaddafi seen as the world's greatest terrorist and organizer and financer of terrorism by American intelligence, and at the same time, Iran later was to become accused of that, and today is now seen as the pivotal center of support for terrorism in the world? There's something else going on here.
Okay, Buff, I just wanted
And
to
what
say,
is that?
I just wanted to say, Dr. Mossadegh, right, had a relationship with the Soviet Union, because back in the early 70s, when we had established the nuclear cycle, and I did a whole show explaining about the enrichment of uranium, it was agreed that Iran would enrich it to a certain percentage and then send it over to Russia, who would then further enrich it, and then Russia would send it to France, and they would then further enrich it, send it out to Westinghouse, and then back down to Argentina, and then again, starting the cycle. That's basically, this is what they said they were doing. So I understand that they would have communications with the Soviet Union. And again,
that was the 50s. That was in the 1950s.
Right. That's when they started it, in the 50s. I'm saying when Dr. Mossadegh was communicating with the Soviet Union at the time, it would have been something that, since they still had that operation going, Russia is still enriching uranium, Iran was still enriching uranium, right, to the same agreement that they started off in the 50s, right? That's where they agreed it. I think it was at a summit in South America of how they would do it, and then it flip-flops between France and Argentina and whatever. But the question is, we knew that they were communicating, Dr. Mossadegh and the Soviet Union. So you're correct. Why would the CIA then say, oh, for that reason, we need to take him out because he's talking with the Soviets, when they've been, Iran has been talking with the Soviets because they're dealing with nuclear interactions all the time. So you're right. So what was the whole point of that? Why do you think they wanted to remove Dr. Mossadegh and bring us to the point that we are now in 2020?
No, that is the question. And how does that relate to the relationship to Libya? I mean, Libya, who the Libyans did not like the Islamic Revolution in Iran. They were not in favor of it. They didn't support it. There's something underneath these layers that we're talking about.
Yeah, we did that revolution in 1978. We were there. Peter Strzok Sr. was there. Barack Hussein Obama's mom, Stanley Ann Dunham, was there. They destroyed it. And not only that, they went to Upper Volta, right, and created Burkina Faso. They destroyed nations in Africa post the Islamic Revolution to create what they wanted. So this is the point.
There's a history, though. Yeah. There's an ancient history that comes right up to today of relations between Persians and Slavs before all the other names come up, Russia and etc. There are these other connections that we're not addressing, that are really tight and binding connections that on the surface we don't see because they're all buried by these layers of ideology and nomenclatures, lexicons that don't relate to what is the real deeper activity going on geopolitically, not just between Persians and Slavs. The Persians and Arabs have always had a kind of an animosity going on, whatever the surface names are of the empires that ruled them. There's a distinction linguistically, especially with the Farsi language and its predecessors, and the regional languages, especially in Afghanistan, compared to Arabic. The only thing that binds the Arabic language with Persian and that Persian complex is the Islamic lexicon that is common to everywhere where Islam is. It's the same lexicon, and they're largely Arab terms, but that's debatable when you get right down to it, where so many of those so-called Arab terms came from, as Arabia was developing before the time of Jesus. There's the depth of analysis that's necessary is not being plummeted, I think, is my point with you. I don't mean in our conversation, but generally, it's not being plummeted. It's being ignored, and it's being now layered with yet more interference in getting to it. And we've really got to get to those roots to have an understanding. That's what Thomas Jefferson was trying to do. Unfortunately, we had a war as a result. But that has a lot to do with his misunderstanding of taxation in Islamic terms, and that's why a Quran was purchased, by the president in London, England, to understand what the taxation system is, the Islamic taxation, so that he could develop relations with the Berbers of North Africa. Well, and instead a big war broke out.
Well, Buff, right now we're in 2020, right? We're still at the same place we were 40, 50 years ago, only in different positions. But if you see it from the moon, right? Or you go to Europa and you watch down, we're still in the same position, from a macro perspective, right? And exactly. So we see that the same relations exist for a long time, but now we can identify that the previous administration helped perpetuate it. Now, this is my assessment. Okay. Turkey is a very key player here in the instability of the region.
That's right.
And Huma Abedin's parents had created, which was obviously Hillary Clinton's sidekick, right? They created the Muslim Brotherhood, her dad did, and her mom established, well, her dad is part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Whoa, the
Not
Muslim
established,
Brotherhood is
not
ancient.
established. No, not established. I wanted to say that he created the nonprofit organization for the Muslim Brotherhood. I corrected myself. And then her mother created the Muslim Sisterhood, which are both organizations are actually housed within the United States of America. Now, what the thing that I'm trying to pinpoint is we have General Flynn, who was in the region of Turkey, and he comes on as the NSA advisor. Now, out of the gate, the president of the United States wants to tackle two things: the two regions on the planet that perpetuate instability, and that would be Iran and North Korea. Now, North Korea is the instability of the Soviet leftovers, right? And the Asian bloc, the Oriental bloc, as one would say. And then we have Iran that is causing the instability in the Islam arc bloc. Okay, so we have those two that he wants to tackle. Now, I'm of the impression that the reason that they removed General Flynn and boxed him and put him in a box and annihilated any instance of him being able to diffuse the situation in the Middle East with the knowledge that he carried back. So, how can I say? They're saying that he was speaking with Russians and all this Russia stuff, but they were unmasking him way before the phone call that they alleged that caused the, coin to, the counterintelligence investigations to initiate. It was actually the ambassador of the United States in Russia that unmasked him a month and then some before that call with the Russians. So my question here is, since we know that Bannon and General Flynn and others had conversations to address the situation in Iran, and this ties in with Khashoggi, and people are saying the Saudis did it. I wanted you to kind of tell me, if President Trump was able to negotiate some kind of deal with Turkey to not have them fund Iran, because they're basically the foster bank for Iran right now. When sanctions were issued, the only nation on the planet that didn't abide by it was Turkey. And we had the Iranian government constantly going to Turkey, and Turkey has been funding them because, like you say, they have a very, first of all, they border each other per se, right? In proximity. And even though they're Sunnis and they're Shias, they have a good economic relationship, a very long-standing economic relationship going from
and an ancient cultural history.
Yes.
Overlapping.
Exactly. So, and they both hate the Saudis a lot, because Turkey's still salty from the Saudis gaining Mecca when their Ottoman Empire fell. And
Bani, we could get to that point really quickly, just for a little moment, a little caesura here. Mecca and Medina are supposed to be governed by what's called Bani Hashim, according to all of the Islamic understanding of that happened in the history of when Mecca became what it became, and Medina what it became. Bani Hashim means the children of the Hashemites, the Hashemite kingdom, which was Jordan later. That is supposed to be the governing culture and tradition of Mecca and Medina. The Aneza tribe that the House of Saud belongs to, the Saudi Arabian governing structure, the House of Saud, is Aneza. They are not supposed to be the governors of Mecca and Medina. And really, in a fundamental sense, when it all comes down to it, this is why Saudi Arabia is hated by the entire Islamic world and Middle East, except when it's doling out, the money. They're despised because of this fact. They are not to be the governors of Mecca and Medina, and they are. They usurped that control and power, and are insisting that they have a right to be governing the two holiest cities of one out of four people on this earth.
Right. So here's where I go back to, and that's correct. So now that people have the context, we're seeing a very solid cooperation, is what I'm trying to get at, between a Sunni majority nation like Turkey with a Shia majority nation like Iran. They're so intertwined together in trade and economy, right? When they're supposed to be, but they're supposed to
culture,
be right, and culture, but buff. In essence, if we take a macroscopic view, right, the Shias are the ones perpetuating the instability to the east and to the west and to the south, right, of their borders, right? Iran is the unstable portion there on the religious, archaic, very old biblical wars. So here we have Sunnis and Shias working together and defying the rest. That's what I'm trying to say. So again, now here we go again with the Erdogan angle that I'm trying to put out. So in order for us to diffuse Iran, we have to have Erdogan on board. And here is where I bring in Khashoggi. And without saying more on that, and I'm going to let it percolate because you're going to be back for this, I want you to tell the world what you believe of Khashoggi. Because when I did my homework on his fiance, it turns out she's an Ibadi Shiite, right? Ibadi. She's from Oman. And well, I'll leave it at that. She's from Oman and she's Ibadi, which is not Sunni or Shia. But I want you to say your piece of how you think Khashoggi played in all this, because a lot of people are saying the Saudis took him out when the Saudis are kind of, why would they take him out if he was helping us diffuse a situation with Erdogan in order to neutralize Iran? Because, Khashoggi was an asset. A lot of people think he was a journalist. He was an asset. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but I wanted you to tell me what, tell me what you think of Khashoggi, aside from the fact that he was related to Dodi, right? Princess Diana's beau, that were killed by journalists. But
listing some facts here. Khashoggi is not an Arab word. It is not an Arabic name, and it is not an Arabic family. It's Turkish.
Thank you.
Adnan Khashoggi, who's featured in a great book called The Kingdom, which I highly recommend. If you want to get the Khashoggi family in context, was an individual in Saudi Arabia, highly esteemed, but never completely embraced. Just as the Khashoggi family has never been completely embraced. The early roots of the Khashoggi family in Arabia and then Saudi Arabia has to do with accommodations, tribal accommodations. And so, in my opinion, one of the reasons, and there are a few, that Khashoggi was dismembered by Arabs, by Saudis, in effect, is because there is a kind of fascistic, purity syndrome in a lot of different cultures of this world, and Arabs are not excluded from those cultures. The Khashoggis gained so much wealth and power, not being Arabs, in an exclusive Arab family, that it became intolerable. It became obnoxious and obscene to them, to the Arabs I'm talking about. The Khashoggis were not seen as one of us, so to speak, and yet had so much power, and we're becoming a little too flamboyant because Jamal, Adnan's nephew, I believe, knew too much and was starting to let it go, was releasing information as a journalist that the royal Arabs did not want to have released. As he was growing further and further separate from, his homeland of Saudi Arabia, he was releasing more and more. And unfortunately, didn't have the kind of protection that he should have had if he was going to continue releasing the real secrets that he knew and that others knew he knew.
Well, wait. So what do you think, right, was the trigger now? Because Khashoggi had been releasing information for a while. It wasn't until the Trump administration came into effect that Khashoggi was more and more in Turkey, right, than he was, anywhere else. And he was more
being Turkish.
Right. And we know that a lot of Pakistanis also have started to gain a lot of power in the Arab nations for centuries. Firstly imported as slaves, and then becoming more prominent because of skills, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm saying, what do you think was the tipping point for the Saudis per se, or why the Saudis per se would have? Obviously, the dismemberment was a thing that they do. I understand, but what was the tipping point at that time to do it? Do you think it had anything to do with Fethullah?
It could have, and it could have, because I think Jamal Khashoggi was not a big fan of Fethullah.
So,
although I know there's another perspective there, but I don't think he was a big fan of Fethullah.
So if Gulen was, say, for example, I wanted to negotiate to defuse Iran, right? Would I negotiate handing over Gulen to Erdogan via Khashoggi, so that way I can, defuse the situation in Iran?
That's
that would be
that's
a big
very
bargaining,
convoluted.
But that would be a big bargaining chip, wouldn't it? If I said, "Hey, Erdogan, guess what?"
But how big of a bargaining chip, though? I mean, it depends on the sizes here.
Yeah, well,
like this, what size is that bargaining chip compared to others?
Yeah, so how's this? I say, I've just issued sanctions and you're not abiding by them to sanction Iran, and I need to economically strangle them so I can assess the situation and stop this blind spot to the Middle East and bring stability and relieve this asphyxiation to the Iranian people. So I would like you, Erdogan, to please not fund them. Please do this for a set period of time and I will give you Gulen. Would Erdogan accept that, considering he, goes nuts and foams at the mouth the minute he hears the name Fethullah Gulen?
Yeah, I don't think that chip is big enough. I really don't. You got to remember what Erdogan wants to become and is becoming. And that is a highly admired leader of the Middle East and admired by the Arabs.
But the Arabs don't admire
by different
him.
Arab states.
Yeah, but they don't admire him.
Do. Well, they do.
Well, they don't have him in the Arab League. They're ousted because they're considered fanatics, and it's been.
But
like
he's not
that
an
for
Arab,
years.
is he?
He's not. But they have Africans in there that aren't Arabs, part of the league. And in fact, I was at one of the meetings that they had, which is the Islam World whatever conference they had back in 2002, and I turned over to one of the interpreters that were there, and I said, hey, why isn't Turkey here? They're like, Turkey will never be in these. They're radicalized. They're not even considered part of our area. And I'm thinking, but they're Sunnis, aren't they? Why would they? Fanatics. And that was reinforced. That was something that I was told during training, but I was also told that by the locals. So, that is, I don't see anyone respecting Erdogan, because the only respect he gets is from Qatar. And that's because they both are tag teaming and being supported by the United Nations right now. Other than that, nobody wants anything to do with Erdogan, on a perspective of negotiations, because he doesn't negotiate, he demands. And, they're still salty about the whole Ottoman, invasion.
Exactly. That is the point. You hit the right key there on the keyboard. The Ottoman residuals are streaming through the bloodstreams of Arab people. And not only Arab people, everybody affected by the Ottoman Empire, which, by the way, in my opinion, was not the worst of empires. Neither was the Seljuk Empire. There were other empires, that were so brutal. And it's really dependent upon who ruled those empires through that course of history, beginning from the 8th century on.
The sultans were pretty bad. I don't like the Ottoman Empire. They were quite vicious and barbaric in the way that they would trample through conquered nations. I mean, you see Arabic inscriptions in Scotland and Roman baths. No one says, wait a minute, why are there, Arab inscriptions in Scotland? Nobody asked that question. And it's like, yeah, because that's a part of history nobody tells you, that, the Ottoman Empire had, plundered all of Europe all the way up to Scotland, and nobody talks about it ever.
Mm-hmm.
You're there, Roman baths, and there's Arabic stuff and, remnants of mosques, and nobody talks about it. All they talk about is the Spanish Inquisition, when it was time to, do things, right? And move the Muslims, as they call them, out.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody talks about real history anymore. Nobody talks about how, this was done. It's as if it didn't exist. It's not even, you have to dig really hard to the times of, Aenwulf, Cinewulf, of the English history to understand what happened. They're just selling the Viking story, not talking about the Ottomans. So myself, from
a little bit of racism in there.
Well, yeah, there is. But, I think that the fact that they exclude that empire and how big it was, and they only show it to a certain extent, which is a lie, right? It is a lie. It is a lie. I mean, how do they explain it? In Ireland and Scotland, that they have remnants of the expansion of the Ottomans.
Well, my point was that as empires of the Middle East go, that's not the most ruthless one. There were previous empires far more ruthless than the Ottoman Empire. I'm not saying that it wasn't ruthless, but it had a different approach to empire, a different way of exercising empire compared to Arab-based empires, let's say. And I'm not anti-Arabic, and I hope your Arab listeners are not thinking that I am. I just think, it's time to pull the blinders off and get really honest about all of this, and look at what the real, roots are at the base of the discord on the surface. And we're getting at it now. We're getting at it, in a dizzying way, you and I in this conversation, but we're getting at it. And you don't hear this kind of conversation, almost anywhere else, except in quiet corners. Wow. And even then, I don't think that people are plummeting the depths. We're talking about the roots of empires here, and the Ottoman Empire was not the most ruthless,
no, it was
comparatively speaking.
I agree.
That was my only point, and given that, and given what Erdogan has as an ambition, and it isn't. I don't believe that he wants to resuscitate the Ottoman Empire, but I think he's cherry picking some of the best of what can be picked out of the memory and knowledge and evidence of that empire, and applying it in his own sort of Machiavellian way, as all emperors do. Yeah, there was democratic elections, and Turkey has been having troubles with the Gulen movement and so on, and he's going to see the Gulen movement as very threatening because of the way that it spread, and that it kind of started to become massive. It wasn't just a small movement, more recently as it continued to develop. It's right here in this city, I can tell you, and I know some Gulenists. And their ambition. Here's my problem with all of that. That movement is professing to be a Sufi sect movement, and it isn't. That is a bald-faced lie that is being used to try to attract others, maybe who aren't necessarily Turkic.
Well, Bob, let me ask you a question. So we have, Hagia Sophia in July was converted to a mosque, and that was actually the gem.
Wait a minute! In July, it was converted to a mosque. I'm missing it. What do you mean?
Yeah,
it's been a mosque for centuries.
But then it stopped being a mosque and it became a museum because it was causing bad blood with the Orthodox community. Now he reopened it as an operating mosque at the end of this year, at the end of July this year. And the first service call to prayer that happened, the Imam actually climbed the steps with the Ottoman sword. And that was very symbolic. So we're in 2020 now, and we see Erdogan getting heat from all areas, south, west, east, and north. The Russians, the Europeans, the Asians, and the Middle East. So he's getting heat on all ends.
He's pretty friendly with the Russians.
Well, I beg to say that with his endeavors in the Black Sea, there's going to be a lot of issues arising. But and with his endeavors in pushing for those 6 miles in the Aegean.
Oh, no doubt. If he becomes the person that he's aspiring to be, he'll have huge trouble with the Russians. No question about it.
So the question
in the meantime, there people get cozy for opportunistic reasons, and he's no exception. He's not a holy man.
Okay, so then now 2020, and it's September. How do you see this working out for Erdogan in the path that he is choosing? Because all this month, right, and from the end of August, he has been rounding up Fethullah's people within his government that are lawyers, because Fethullah attempted and was behind the coup that was happening back in 2016 in Turkey. So now with
you're saying you agree that he was?
I believe that it was made to look like he was. How's that?
And all the Fethullahs in amongst those people being arrested, they're not doing his bidding.
Not doing what? Fethullah's bidding? No, I believe they would be. But the question is, he's now rounding up all the Fethullahs within, just a couple days ago, 43 attorneys that had links to Fethullah were arrested by Erdogan. So he's doing a cleanup internally that no one's hearing about much, right? It's kind of under a cloak. So internally within his nation, he's doing a wide sweep cleanup. He's calmed down on the Syrian, with the Idlib, trying to conquer Idlib because Russia's been standing really firm there. Russia's been sitting there eating popcorn, watching what he's doing in the Aegean Sea because, they have one of their biggest naval bases in
the issue with the
Greeks
now again.
Yeah. So they're sitting there watching, because if Turkey's now decided all of the water surrounding Cyprus is theirs, and, with the UN giving them easement to be the with the mutual defense agreement they have with just Tripoli, right? Because that's supposedly the only legit, according to the UN, area of Libya. Now they get more easement. They're pushing back on the Greek territory because they're seeking oil. And that's what they're saying. So Russia's sitting there quietly in their naval base, eating popcorn, watching what Turkey's doing in the Aegean. In the meantime, in the north, they're pushing back to keep Turkey from gaining more ground. I mean, in 2018, when they were getting really active, I said, watch them expand their green zone another, 20, 30 miles. And it was like clockwork. 6 months later, that's exactly what they did. And so now they have all these fronts that are kind of controlled. They're going full speed ahead in the Aegean, and now full speed ahead in the Black Sea. And he's cleaning up internally. What do you, based on your experience, see happening, considering that that's happening? And then we have Iran, which is their main source of economy in regards to energy locally.
Turkey's main source of economy.
Yeah, well, for energy,
okay,
yeah,
because of energy from
Iran.
Okay, I got
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So now
I want to be clear. What we're
yeah. So now we have Turkey bullying their way into the Aegean and not giving two dimes on what anybody else has to say. They don't care about who says what economic zone. They say, we say it's ours, period. That's it. We're seeing an alliance, Egypt, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Italy, right, forming. And Russia sitting there quietly, just holding the Syrian front. And then from the north, holding from the Georgian front, if that makes sense, right up there. And Turkey is really pulling itself on each side. I'm not understanding well, there's two options. The one option is that they just pull the pin and go full speed ahead in the Aegean to distract. The other option is that they cut Iran off so that they can go full speed ahead north and west of Turkey. What is your thought on that? I mean,
number one, I don't think that Turkey will ever cut Iran off, given the border area, given the number of Shia in Turkey, in that region, in that southeastern region of Turkey, and given the stability of access to food for Turkey, not just oil and gas and that direction of thinking in terms of trade, but food, just basic food. Or if Erdogan can make sure that there is food for everybody, he's going to be stable to a large extent. It's when food starts to get disrupted that you really have a big problem. And cutting ties with Iran would mean disrupting the flow of food. And people don't talk about it. Everybody's talking about oil and gas all the time. The issue between Iran and Turkey has everything to do with food. Then you go to the other areas of, what's the trade-off? What do you trade for grain? There's oil and gas. That you disrupt that in Turkey, and you're going to have the overthrow of Erdogan. You're going to have revolutionary activities going on across the country.
Well,
and
the food aspect is an interesting angle. I mean, it's there, but for me, that's
it's there in Turkey.
Yeah. The southeastern portion, though, access that they have with Iran is also smuggling nuclear materials. I mean, they've been caught black market smuggling nuclear materials across the border, and right now with the U.S. presence in northeastern Syria, that's pretty much cutting off a lot of their trade routes, as one would say. But I'm
what do you mean by nuclear material?
Nuclear material. Like there was only one report, and this happens all the time, where they caught people in Turkey, the U.S., in that green zone that they had, where they caught Turkish people coming from Iran, and they had wrapped actual uranium in tons and tons of blankets, like so remedial, right? And they were just driving into Turkey from Iran, and they had brought uranium with them. There was
for Turkey to use for its nuclear energy
I don't think
program.
it's from Turkey. I think it's to sell it to other factions that perpetuate, whatever. I don't think Turkey would have used people in a car wrapping uranium in blankets, which is crazy. I mean, it's not like a blanket's going to save you. But that's just one example of a report that actually leaked out into the media, because, the media is controlled information. It's not real information. It's what they allow you to see. So that one had slipped through the cracks maybe about a year ago, that they were caught smuggling uranium. So, there's a lot more than food that's being traded over those borders, along with artifacts, right?
This is a hard one to press and prove. The uranium in what form? Refined uranium or raw uranium?
So here's the thing. I want to say something on that, but I can't. But I can only refer to what's public, right? That was actually a public report. They weren't very clear. It's just that they had uranium with them, and they transported it across the borders. Now, I know this for a fact. It has been happening for decades.
Radioactive uranium wrapped in blankets. That's implausible.
No, that actually happened. You can Google it. There's an article about it.
No, but it can't be. It can't have just been wrapped in blankets.
I know. I just told you that. Yeah, I know, because it's not going to save you. You can have 1,000 blankets. You're still going to get radiation poisoning.
Yeah,
I know that. I'm just saying that's just to the level that they took it to, just to show if there is an organized trade route for that, with people that carry it in, the right containers. There's also a black market for it where people risk their lives to do it, because that is a trade route. That is what I'm trying to get at. I can only use information that's in the public.
They're using the Silk Road for
the uranium road, I would say, right? The uranium
I'm being ironic.
Yeah.
What's become of the Silk Road, which was the binding artery in ancient times for all of what we're talking about? Everything was about the
there
Silk
it is.
Road.
Someone found the article. It was from RT News, radioactive material bust. So what I'm trying to say, by using what's available in the public and not, saying things I shouldn't be saying, right? I don't need to go to Leavenworth. There are established trade routes that are black market routes for uranium. And so where they obtain these, lower level uranium transporters, and that was leaked, right, to the media, that they were caught in their car driving around with uranium. This is a very big, problem, considering where we're going for 2020 with the START agreement not being renegotiated, which is, about uranium and nuclear weapons, right? And the fact that there's a lot of pressure now onto Iran. And the question again is, Turkey already knows these routes are there. These trade routes for illegal uranium, or legal, or just a quiet, maybe, discussion between Turkey and Iran that nobody knows about, right? These routes aren't established, without someone knowing. I mean, the drug routes we have on our southern border are known to the CIA, ATF, ICE, right? They know where they go, and they mule in the coke and whatnot. So obviously Turkey knows the routes established by their governments there. So the question is, where do you see this going? Because Turkey is taking no prisoners right now. So what would be the next step for Iran to come forward, considering that next month they can start buying weapons on the open market?
Iran, Persian thinking is sly. It's and filled with great ancient wisdom. When you think about the wiliness of Erdogan and his ambitions, he's in a sense, a pawn of that Persian net of thought, and you can't escape going to the psychological analysis side of things when you're dealing with all of these different people. And, Orientalism was an incredible book by Edward Said, that began to penetrate all of this. And there are other books too, and I'm sure you can name 10 or 15 of them that bring you to this threshold of recognizing that commodities and substance trade subjects are trumped by the psychology of the whole situation. And there's Turkic thinking. It first of all, it's hard to say is just Turkic. There's a lot that's feeding into that thinking, Mongolian included. Persian thinking is also hard to isolate, although they're a little more fierce. The Fars, or what we in the West call Farsi, the Fars people are Persians, and Pers, that word is the same as Fars, Pers. It's all the same root. That kind of net of thinking is a little bit different from Turkic thinking, and I think the wrong questions are being asked, and to understand the whole picture, Erdogan wants to be a caliph, but not a religious caliph. The Shia, they want an empire, because they're righteous, and they think that they've created what's called the Vilayat or the Wali for the coming of the 12th Imam. And theirs is more fervent and impassioned with religious belief. Erdogan's is not. But those believers, coming from the Fars side of it, coming from the Persian side of it, Iran and so on, they have a better understanding of Erdogan than Erdogan has of them. And he's sitting in a throne that's been woven, in part at least, by the Persians. The Persians are used to the Turks and branches of what is called the Turkic profile, because there are some of those cultures and tribes that are also in Iran and are associated with ancient Persia. There is an overlap there, but there are real distinctions between methods of thinking and forms of personalities that we're dealing with here.
Right, but Erdogan's
I think that's more important than the oil and gas and even food.
Well, okay, so Erdogan's personality is quite
imperious.
Yeah, but he's also very I want to say aggressive, and sometimes doesn't think through what he says, because listening to him speak, and a lot of the media doesn't cover it, so I have to watch. I listen to Iranian news, I listen to all types of news. He makes statements of war with the word choice that he has, and he's quite short-tempered and very focused in whatever his goal is. And the concern that I have now, and hence the two timelines that may occur from this, is that this transport of illegal radioactive materials, obviously linked to the lithium that was torched in Beirut, right? Because you do need lithium when you use things like uranium, californium, all that stuff.
Yeah, or if you're a schizophrenic.
Well, no,
lithium is
yeah,
used.
I know. Well, it is, but I'm just saying there was a massive explosion, implosion. It was a weapon that not a lot of people know about, that was used to actually implode and remove. So the question is, we're at this point right now that we have elections going on in the United States that the Democrats know they've already lost, so they're just going to try anything to steal. Next month is October, and everybody always talks about October surprises, and the surprise could be Iran's right here and able to buy weapons. We have Turkey pushing their aggression as a leveraging chip, right? To, you want me to help you with the, the Shias, and Iran, you better let me do what I want, and this is where we're at right now. This is mid-September, and we have internal politics within the US that are just gonna go really quick because the gloves after Labor Day were taken off. And so that's on the internal, continental United States politics. Then we have the global politics that sit on top that are driving us insane. We're quickly trying to create these alliances and agreements to stabilize what we can because the instability is right there. Turkey and Iran. Turkey is pushing on the West to leverage themselves as the only one that can leverage, apparently, Iran. And that is something that's very concerning.
On the east, you mean?
Yes, on the eastern side. Turkey's pushing on the West to leverage what they can do on the east. And
okay, I got it.
Yeah, and then we have Russia kind of randomly there, monitoring the north of Turkey and the south, right, which is Syria, and then the Black Sea and Crimea, etc., where they're starting to get aggressive there, which is a big mistake. They're like, oh, we found oil in the Black Sea. Like, why the heck would you get in there when you already saw what Russia did for Crimea in the area of the Black Sea? Like, they're pulling strings everywhere just to see how taut they can go. So I'm seeing that Turkey is leveraging themselves to get what they want by saying, well, if you give us what we want, we'll help you with Iran. And this is the October surprise that I'm concerned about, on a global scale. I mean, what do you think of that assessment?
Well, I think it's a fair assessment. It's a fair perspective. I think that some bold movements are needed, and benefit of the doubt, I think the previous presidents have tried in their more often feeble ways of these bold, adventurous statements and actions with that region. But some really, really bold things need to happen to stir it all up and get things settled.
How would you?
I don't mean divide and rule. I think a little bit of humility is a good way to start. And I don't think Trump is necessarily capable of humility, but he might be.
Why would he have to be?
In looking at where things first went wrong, and suggesting that we move on from there, not starting from the front backwards, but starting from backwards to the front. If wrong things have not been corrected and are seen as constantly agitating decisions and relations between nations, get to the origin of what may be the wrongfulness of events and developments. America has never been seen as a humble nation.
It's
know that.
But America
not by the rest of the world.
Right, because it's
if there was a little bit of an outreach to Iran, I don't mean, with tail between the legs, but an outreach where, hey, we're sorry that we killed Mossadegh. He should not have been killed.
Wait, stop 1 second. Bob, but President Trump has nothing to do with the previous administrations. The Iranians know that. Iran is not stupid. They know that he does not tango with the clandestine community, the private contracting, the military industrial complex. They know that. So the Iranian government already knows that he should not be apologizing for things that were done with people they negotiated with. He's made that clear. Okay, so I think the problem that I'm having right now is that we have very little time before things escalate. And
you got it. That's absolutely
right. And so,
sure.
This START agreement, Russia's been kind of like nagging about it every couple months. They're like, we haven't discussed the START agreement. China's getting aggressive because, now the EU took their teeth out, sinking it into the, Communist Party. So they're kind of, fracturing there too. The Chinese are fracturing too on the local level.
Well, yeah, and they're being blamed for a plague.
Well, and we know it's the Europeans.
They in part are certainly responsible for it. I'm not suggesting that they're not, and that they didn't do. They should have done what they didn't do. The Chinese, but there are all kinds of crazy errors and foolish, adventurous decisions that are being made recently, and that's very dangerous. It's getting frighteningly dangerous. Bold moves are necessary. Things that shake people into a new consciousness, into something different and refreshing rather than old and morbid.
So what's different and refreshing? Because right now there's only two avenues that I can see being diffused, which is negotiating with Turkey and, taking out and causing instability in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? Or trying to get into Iran and grab the two factions of Iran, which are the people of Iran, and then, the whole cultivated from the revolution by the CIA, Peter Strzok daddy, Barack Hussein Obama's mom portion of Iran. But how do you get in there fast enough to get it done?
If you're going to lay the blame with those people and not recognize that the people of Iran made that revolution. They made that revolution. The millions of people in the streets of Iran in 1978 and 1979 made that revolution. We can look at all kinds of outside influences and forces that provoked and pulled this string or pushed that button, but ignoring that was an Islamic revolution is totally the wrong decision to make and the wrong direction to go into. First and foremost, it was an Islamic revolution, like it or not, with a lot of people probing and pulling strings around it. But the masses of Iran, those Iranian people, did that revolution. It wasn't the CIA.
Well, the CIA influenced those operations. That's why Peter Strzok's father was there to see that revolution through. That's why he was there. But
the makings of it, the force of it, the will of it was in those people.
The will is in the people here too. I mean, it's not like these insane people that are setting fires don't have a will in them. It's just tugging the right string to make them want to burn building down and shoot people and do things. Regardless, what I'm trying to say is
those are loners though. That's not like a mass.
Loners. No, this is mass.
People that happen.
No, this is mass. We have been watching them coordinate with millions of dollars with a lot of people pulling strings on.
Are you talking about Antifa?
Not just Antifa. There's tons of groups that are kind of under, if we want to use an umbrella, we could just say anarchists. But regardless, I don't want to focus on that.
Wouldn't agree with that.
What I want to focus on is how do we diffuse the situation, because it's going to get ugly in the next 30 days on a global scale. Right?
Yeah.
Because the last thing we want now is to have the left, saying, oh, we don't know who's president, even though we know Trump is winning. There's like no way. They have no platform. They have no message, and they're trying to steal the election. So we're going to have that turmoil, but we're also going to have a global scale kickoff that this fourth unelected branch of government. I mean, we've got people that hate the president right now with their stupid companies in Saudi Arabia, Iron Hand, I think it's called. Iron Horse, Iron Hand, same generals, same stars, pushing and funding and helping revolutions in Iran under the guise of them completing contract work in Saudi Arabia. Now,
and like 9/11 wasn't all about Saudi Arabia,
right? But the thing is, the Saudis have them there and contracted them there. These are American generals, keep in mind. To do certain work, and at the same time they're doing their own covert work in perpetuating the instability. So we have our own people working against us to promote instability in the Middle East, is my point. And these disgusting generals are not only using their contracts with other nations under different names, because they have thousands, if not.
Yeah, and they're all in King David Hotel, aren't they?
look, the bottom line is we're not going to get too much in the details. The Saudis don't know how to close that off because you don't want to piss these generals off. These clowns have a nonprofit using veterans as a front so that they can perpetuate wars and propaganda to keep this instability going. Because if they have instability in Afghanistan, that means they get more contracts to do work. If they have more instability in northeastern Syria and Iraq and Iran, then they have more money to make. And so how do we diffuse the Iran situation? Like, if someone was to ask me personally, I'd say cut the contracts. I mean, we're doing that by pulling the troops from Afghanistan, right? Suffocating the money of these military, industrial, private contracting companies. But what we have in the next 30 days, we're going to have a big, this is why Pompeo is traveling in the Middle East and speaking with Qatar and the Taliban. We've got a big issue with Iran right now, and they're being empowered by the aggression that Erdogan is having on his own front, because his aggression saying this water's mine, this is mine, is, a leveraging chip. Oh, you want me to stop doing this? Well, then you need to do this for me. And he throws shade and cover to Iran. This is what my assessment is. Though his aggression and his short temper and his, goal, whatever that may be, to bring himself to the point where the empire was before, God knows what it was that he wants, was keyword. So if I remember correctly,
he will never be seen as a caliph,
right?
By the masses.
No,
that's for sure.
But the
mistake, who are capable of one revolution after another, and Iran, they're waiting for their Imam Mahdi, to return.
Yeah,
the 12th Imam.
Coming.
That's what it's all about there, really. And despite the Machiavellian analysis that is so tempting all the time, ignoring that religious zeal and the hidden, quanta of power that exists in a place like Iran, if the right people start to pop up and emerge in and amongst these ayatollahs and secular leaders, you can see another revolution happening there, because things have gone a bit adrift from the original purpose of that, what's called vilayat. And then go to Turkey with that, and see how Turkey's able to negotiate, with a leader who wants to be a caliph. He'll never be a caliph to the Shiites. So he's got an eastern province that is tied to Iran because of its Shia, constituency, which is the majority of southeastern Turkey. He doesn't want to lose that part of Turkey, for sure not. Nor does he want to embitter a relationship with Iran. But I don't think, honestly, not just between us, because everybody else is listening, but I don't think he's smart enough to recognize, or wily and cunning enough, as perhaps only a Persian mind can be, to recognize how that he can't be, and never could be, and never will be, the caliph that he's trying to make himself out to soon be. You can't push aside the belief factor here.
You're right.
It's a variable that's stronger than anything else.
But he's too stupid to see that his aggression in the Black Sea is what's going to cost him, because the Russians will come down from the north and quash him. They had no problem going up against the U.S. and the European Union to maintain their territory in the Black Sea with Crimea, that everyone keeps calling annexing, even though we know that the Crimeans actually voted, and 96% of them said, no, we don't want to be part of the European Union. But he's made that mistake by entering the north because he feels that he's so aggressive. He feels that he can leverage that with Russia when Russia has him from the north and the south. And, he feels like he has that protection. But my point is, if you, strategy wise, if anything, I see his strategy, which is, I'm going to push as hard as I can because they know that I'm the only one that can help with the Iranian situation. And now that Iran is going to have access to weapons, you need me. So kneel, because this is the type of leader he is. He gets what he wants, is how he states it and pushes. So with that, knowing his strategy, how do you diffuse Iran? So what do? You go to all the nations around Iran, like the UAE, Israel, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and you create these alliances, economic alliances, and you get their mutual agreements on board before this is about to pop. And I foresee that the first victim of this will not be Iran, but it'll be Turkey if they continue on that path and don't retract. This is my assessment.
And you know what?
Analytics.
That'll only appease Iran, because Iran's going to get a lot of goodies out of that if Turkey falls apart.
And yeah, they will. But, they've already started drawing the borders of Kurdistan, right? So Iraq's not happy about that because that takes a chunk out of them. Iran's not happy because it's taking a chunk out of them. And Turkey's obviously not happy because you can't redraw, borders without pissing people off. But history tells you that borders are drawn and redrawn every day. And what annoys them the most is that the most infantile nation on this planet, which is the United States of America, it's fairly new, is the one driving this. But it's driving it for the sake of stability and peace.
The misconception of a Kurdistan?
Well, Kurdistan has already been mapped out, period. It's already been mapped out. And it's just a matter of time.
That it's mapped out because that's where the Kurds all live. That doesn't.
But this is going to be a
I
repeat.
don't agree with you here.
No. I'm going to tell you. It's already
mapped out by interests outside.
So you saw how they
mapped the Kurdistan area.
Okay, post World War II, we already had a map of where Israel was, but there were no borders, correct? And then post World War II, we had borders, and Israel was recognized, correct? We're going to see the same thing now with Kurdistan. The borders are there.
Eretz Israel. It was recognized by anybody who knows a little bit of Hebrew long before 1947. Eretz Israel is still an ambition of a truly zealous Jew. And I'm saying this as, being the son of a Jewish mother and someone who studied in one of the yeshivas there. Eretz Israel has been forever. And to a zealous Jew, it's going to happen.
Wait, I'm not talking about what's Bob. Let me explain. Before World War II, there were no recognized borders of a nation of Israel, right? There was no state of Israel borders. Post World War II, we had borders for Israel and they were being recognized. What I'm saying to you is, in the next year, those borders that are drawn for Kurdistan will then be recognized as a nation of Kurdistan. The nomads will finally get their borders. That is what I'm saying. And this is why Turkey is pushing and Iran is pushing and everyone's pushing. But, it's genius move, very good strategy to get agreements from the other Middle Eastern nations. The problem and the unforeseen problem is the hold that the Turkic Empire has on the other side of Iran, which is Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, which is totally European, right? And that is the front that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. I understand that the administration is targeting first Afghanistan, hence the discussions with the Taliban, because that is the most unstable right now. But if we have the Pakistanis working with...
It has been since Alexander the Great.
Right. It has been. But if we have the Pakistanis right now working with the Turkic Qatari type bloc, and they're smothering that other side of Iran to come in and close in Turkey and Pakistan as borders. I'm just saying, to smush them in, we can have real big issues. So if I was a strategist on this, I'd say I'd get on the horn to the Armenians, to the Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and start having conversations on that side of Iran, because it's looking really, really ugly from the news that I saw last night coming out of Turkey, and the speeches I've seen, and the fact that they're collecting all these Gulen people, and that they're arresting all these, what do they call private contractors? Journalists, right? That's usually who gets arrested, right? It's a journalist or a student, right? So they're arresting all of them from all nations. I mean, they obtained, they nabbed about 24 to 48 hours ago a big group of journalists, I'm air quoting here, from the European Union. The majority of them were German. And so it's really heating up internally with Turkey. They're getting ready. Turkey's just getting ready to leverage. Iran is getting ready to just pull the pin. And what we have is Europe adding fuel to that fire. They're just adding it. And right now, that's the concern that I see, that this instability is growing as we're diffusing. The more diffusion we have, these agreements on the western side of Iran, the more the unrest is growing on the eastern side with Pakistan, Kashmir, India, China, and they're all leaking into Azerbaijan, all of these nations. And we're seeing like a ripple effect coming in from the Chinese end block of the Shias. That's what I'm trying to say. Those western borders where Pakistan
and Azerbaijan, what you mentioned 3 times now, is Shiite. You know that.
I know. And so that's going to be a problem. I mean, if anything, that's why I was shocked that they sent someone like Molly Fee, as the ambassador of Afghanistan. She did the worst things ever in Sudan for Barack Hussein Obama. I mean, she was a plant there. She just sat there and looked pretty like a plant on a desk. She did nothing. She did absolutely nothing. And we sent the most useful team to Afghanistan. And I'm just like, who are these people? Why? I mean, it could be a way that Pompeo puts her there so her team can get exposed and crucified for what, they've been doing. But on the other hand, we don't have time for that kind of slow roll exposure like we have on our internal politics that have to be done slowly. We need something quick. So what would be the option of something quick aside from let's get all the eastern border Turkish, anything that borders Turkey and Iran in a room and let's talk? That's the question here. What would be the strategy? I mean, I don't see any other strategy.
What do you do with Armenia and Azerbaijan, where wars keep breaking out? Look at those 2 sides. Armenia is Christian, and so who is it that's supporting Armenia in its aggressions against Azerbaijan and bombing Azerbaijan? While these other nations to the south might be meeting, and Armenia might feel even freer to start bombing Azerbaijan again. And I was there when that bombing was happening in the last round.
Right.
I was a guest of the government of Azerbaijan. Now, I'm not anti-Armenian. I've, in my entire life, have never been anti-Armenian. I think it's a most fascinating place, and such a history it has. But the Armenians, are going to be the source of some major disruptions of what might otherwise be some fairly, good, peaceful developments. Because the moment they see an opening, they start bombing again and taking more land from Azerbaijan. And who's stopping Armenia? Who's attempting to put any controls on Armenia when they do that? And I'm not saying that they're the only culprits. Azerbaijan has pulled a couple of stunts with Armenia too. But in the country of Azerbaijan, the Armenians, are all over the place, as they are in Turkey. I was stunned. All the cab drivers, I'm a little bit, exaggerating here, but almost all the cab drivers in Turkey are Armenian. And when you get into the inner circles in Turkey, you find Armenians all over the place. And then you start hearing about Armenian genocide, and then the drums start to beat, and you hear it over and over, more and more. And you look into it carefully, and it's who's promoting this ideology of
I'd
genocide?
be promoting that ideology. I'm all for the Armenians bringing some instability in eastern Turkey and Azerbaijan so that we can level it. I'm all for it. I'm just telling you, I'm all for it.
Are you part Armenian?
No, I'm not. But I can tell you that what they experienced in the 1900s was something that the Greeks experienced for 400 years. And, obviously this
is... that's right, you're Greek. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Same thing though,
no,
right?
But
they're Orthodox.
There's a bridge between Armenia and Greece.
There is a very big one. So the thing is, I'm just saying, right? Right now, what we need is to, get all these people that are having these issues. Like you said, it's a very unstable region, and they are key also to Turkey's economy, because since Turkey's leveraging with aggression, right, and putting a front out both on the north and on the west and the south, right, with Syria, we should tackle the eastern part of Iran, because this is going to be inevitable. No one is going to want to sell weapons to Iran if we've got both sides of Iran with agreements in place, and that people sit down and talk, and that it's so fine, this line that you have to walk. And that sucks, because right now the president has to walk that fine line and trust that he doesn't have clowns like Admiral Harris in South Korea, excuse my French, fucking shit up with North Korea completely. Like, I don't know why his mustache is there.
Do you think Trump is capable intellectually of doing what you're suggesting?
I wouldn't have voted for him if he wasn't. He is.
I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. I'm not a Republican or Democrat, or I'm just not. I don't find myself anywhere along that political spectrum. But I don't find Trump to be very intellectually engaging. I do not find him to be capable of even comprehending this discussion that we're having.
Well, how's
and
this?
It worries
how's
me
this?
greatly.
How's this? Let me tell you something, kind of like an example.
And Biden is a madman.
Okay, Biden's got dementia. He's not even in charge anymore.
He never has been intellectually in charge. I've seen him when 9/11 happened. He went ballistic.
Look,
in a very unstable way.
I saw that. Yeah, he lost his mind. But listen, what I want to tell you. So I want us to end this hour. We've been on for like 2 hours and 40 minutes. How cool is this? So we've got 20 minutes. Yeah, we've got 20 minutes, so I could do it at a 3-hour mark. But and I want us to discuss the meaning of two specific names. But before we get there, what I wanted to kind of say is Barack Hussein Obama had created this group. Well, Brennan had created this group within the White House that I may or may not have been a part of up until 2014, called the HIG. It's actually HIG. People then called it HVIG. So I go with HVIG because that's the only thing that you will find, somewhere on the media still. So HIG was considered high intelligence group. It was off the books. There were very few strategists, contractors, and government officials that were part of that. The name HVIG came out of the mouth of the director of national intelligence at one point in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. And Brennan came out and said, we're gonna, no, this was a high value intelligence group. They filed the charter after it was leaked by the DNI because it was illegal. The president can't have his own little groups without registering them as part of the presidential records. You see what I mean? You can't do that, but he did have it off the books. And so I may or may not have been part of that HIG. paying attention. And so it was off the books, but then they made it on the books and made it sound like it was a high value interrogation group where they were interrogating things. So Obama did it in a sneaky way by bringing it into his office. Trump is such a genius that he doesn't need to create any high intelligence group or any ghost shadow faction that he gets with, right? He doesn't. Instead, what he has is the United States of America and the people within it that can publicly offer him this information. So he's a genius because he has the right people with the right amount of volume. You can't have the same volume. Like, imagine if I had the volume of some other people, we would be at war every day. So we would be at war every day. So it would be with the right amount of volume and the right amount of ability to speak and be heard and then filtered, rather than create these little factions. So one of those would be like the Q movement per se, right? Where I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this Q movement,
QAnon?
yes, this Q movement is a psychological operation against the psychological operation people, not the people. So basically, it's a bunch of people that are reality hacking the military industrial complex. And who is amplifying that for them? It is the people. They're letting the people know what they're doing, and in essence, hijacking the damn generals and admirals and private contractors and people that, think that their poop
The
doesn't stink.
military industrial complex.
There you go.
A la
So
Eisenhower.
exactly. So here's where the good people, the white hats, have decided to hijack the military. The communications between QAnon being put out were never intended for the people. They were intended to put fires under the butts of the military industrial complex. That was the whole purpose. In essence, though, it became an information highway for people of the nation and the world to be able to identify things and understand. This is just my humble assessment, of course. It's for people to understand what is really going on and how much control this administration really has. And without breaking the rules and being completely transparent, the president is able to garner the information he needs with analysts and pundits and, just random people having conversations like this. So on that note, speaking of their names, I wanted you to add, because you've written for major Shia and Sunni persons and know them quite well, and the core of Islam, I wanted you to analyze just one name, Barack Hussein Obama. The name. Can you explain to my audience what the name means?
Barack means gift. Hussein is the name of the son of Ali, who was first cousin and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad. Obama, I don't know. I've tried to figure that out. I do not know. I think there's a strong African overlay, phonologically speaking, to that term, because Obama or Bama, I could not find a meaning for in any of my searches, but Barack Hussein is very clear. So if it's a sentence, if that's what you're getting at, if this is an Arabic sentence that's translatable, the first two names are, you could say gift of Hussein. When you see the Shiites rising and doing what they do, and by the way, the Shia is not popular in Africa anywhere right now.
Yeah, I know.
But historically, it was hugely popular. It just was defeated by various invasions of Arabs who were Sunnis. But if it's a sentence, apart from the last name, which wasn't anybody's choice, it was the last name. way back in some generation or other, it was somebody's choice probably. But in terms of the chosen names of Barack Hussein Obama, you would go with Barack and Hussein. So it means the gift of Hussein.
So that would be a gift to the Shiites, right? To the Shias, correct?
Yeah, because Hussein is a martyr, as is his brother Hassan, and these are the children of Fatima and Ali, the two sons of Ali and Fatima or Fatima, and so Hussein is much more popular than Hassan as one of the two martyrs of that particular brotherhood in the family. And there's that chant, Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein, Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein.
So the question is, so if Barack Hussein Obama was considered, his name is a gift from Hussein, that to the Shias, would that be considered like the 12th, maybe? Considered maybe the 12th?
It wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't a faction somewhere that thought that he might have been the 12th Imam or is the 12th Imam. I really, really doubt it. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that would never catch on in the extended Shiite world.
What if, all his actions were to prove that? Because for 8 years in his administration, all he proved was, pushing to promote the Shias. Because that's all he did. He funded and promoted the Shias. He armed them. He pushed them. So I'm just saying.
But he was allowed to buy Muslims everywhere. I mean, it was a shock to the people of the Islamic world that he could have even become president. It was, it stunned the Islamic world.
Yeah, considering what his data
Shia
actually
and Sunni,
says.
Shia and Sunni.
Yeah, well, he slipped once and said that he was born in Morocco. You know that, right? He slipped once and said that. So the question, I guess, a lot of people have is, who is the real Barack Hussein? Because he seems to, be of Islam faith. He claims it, and he's not shy to claim it. But he's completely contrary to Islam faith, considering, he is not traditional in the way he carries out the traditional faith, right? By choice of partner and actions.
No, and knows Christian prayers and prays Christian in Christian edifices.
Tekiya is fine, right? That's allowed. But the thing
is, did you just say tekiya?
Yeah. You say
okay,
whatever.
Do your listeners know what you mean by tekiya?
Yeah, tekiya is kind of, they're allowed to say things in order to
deflect.
Yeah.
To deflect and to protect the truth.
Exactly.
It's an ironic conclusion that you can lie to protect the truth.
Correct. And so he's been lying a lot. A lot of tekiya. His name should be Barack Hussein Tekiya Obama. That's what his name should be. But so we've got Obama, right? Barack Hussein. Let's leave the Obama because it was a Tekiya last name, right?
It is to me.
I
don't know. I'm sorry if I can say, if anybody can find out the etymology of a word, it's me. And that Obama, I think it actually has an African tribal base. That's my conclusion. And there are so many different languages in Africa, Hausa, and there just are so many that could have come out of. Well, I honestly don't know the tribes that he's associated with, that his etymology, and his genealogy spills from. I don't know which tribes those are.
Someone is suggesting that it comes from Obama, kind of like, how Osama was really Usama and they changed it,
that's dialect drift. It's still
right. It's still. Yeah. But so the question is, I mean, could it be that, Barack Hussein Tekiya Obama may, for the Shias, been considered possibly the 12th one that was to come?
Well, if there's a grand conspiracy to prop somebody up, like in the novel called The Mahdi, which I encourage you and your listeners to read. The book is about a CIA plot to prop up someone and give the world of Islam the impression that he was the Mahdi. And it's a fascinating book, believe me. It's called The Mahdi, Mahdi. Which is one of the titles of who would be the 12th Imam. But if you're suggesting there was such a conspiracy behind Obama that propped him up and brought him to the Mahdi's throne, so to speak, I would find that impossible.
Yeah, well, I would say that when he was in Karachi and Islamabad training and hanging out with what people consider his boyfriend, this whole Mahdi situation may have been brought up. And
but they're the Shia of the Shia. See, let's not forget the Sunnis also have a belief in a Mahdi coming, who saves the day and is the leader of all of Islam. The Sunnis have that also. They just don't think it's going to be the 12th Imam. The Sunnis consider this imamate of the Shia to be very, very Disneyland-like or fanciful.
Yeah, and if Hillary Clinton was in office, we would have seen that face a rise. And maybe this is why, when Secret Service picked names, specific names were picked for Barack Hussein Taqiyya, which was renegade, which means traitor, right? And that was pretty evergreen for Hillary. She never dies. I'm just saying. I mean, this is chit chat because a lot of us have been, familiar with ISI, familiarized with them. I don't know if you've been familiarized with them. That should be another topic that we should discuss.
Familiarized or
familiarized, or maybe have visited. Not familial. Familiarized.
I know who they are.
So
I know who they are. They are astute.
Oh, they are the most vicious intelligence.
They
on
learned
the planet.
From the Mossad.
Yeah, they control everything. So that should be a conversation that we should have another time, because maybe
about
we can
intelligence
exchange.
agencies and secret societies.
Ooh, we can talk about my visit to Karachi, and I don't know, maybe yours if you want to talk about it someday. All right. So on that note, I want to thank you for coming on to the ToreSays show, Buff. I want to have you on for a Middle Eastern edition again, since the news is kind of repeating. There was nothing new yet to say. I think it's Constitution Day on the 17th. So I guess tomorrow we'll have a lot to talk about on the domestic and foreign front, I guess. But thank you so much for coming on, Buff. I can't wait to have you on again.
I think you and I can throw some spiritual maps out there and throw some guidance into a very confusing picture, very scrambled and confusing picture that the next president is going to have to be dealing with, and so will so many other leaders of the world. This conversation is not a conversation that happens very often amongst anybody. And I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. And in the next one, we will get to you writing for the IRGC, because, we exchanged some stories about being in Iran, right? And how my most favorite possession was actually purchased in Iran. I actually really like the people of Iran a lot. They're completely different to the government. So we should talk about that. We should have an Iran special where we just talk about Iran and what we know about Iran and their politics. And, you were very connected with the IRGC, and that would be a very interesting conversation for people to hear, because this is how people learn to be able to discern the difference between the perceived and actual situations, something intelligence agencies use a lot, right? So
absolutely.
God bless.
Absolutely. Iran is a mystique. It always has been an enigma and a mystique. It always has been. It's because Persian mysticism is what it is. it it has worked well through the centuries for those people. When it becomes a government like the Islamic Republic of Iran today, the world is in so many ways disarmed by it because it has not ever understood it.
I agree.
And that it's time to start understanding it.
And understanding how history has been skewed. I'm totally on board. Again, Buff, thank you so much for joining me on my show. I look forward to the next segment and for us chit-chatting soon. God bless. Have a wonderful day, because you are 2 hours behind. So you have more of the day than I do. God bless.
Yeah.
Thanks,
That's
Bob.
right. And we'll get our clock set correctly.
Yes.
Once again.
Excellent. I
I
appreciate
enjoyed
your
this.
time. Me too.
It's healthy.
Ciao, Buff. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I don't know if you got more than, well, if you got, gosh darn it, my darn headphones, give me a second. I hope you got the information that you need to understand what's going on in that region right now. And just to understand what this president is really up against. From the domestic side of things, we've got the global side of things. And then if you maybe watch from the moon, you'll see that a lot more is going on, and that the world is really on fire. And that these fires, and as the president had said, these are very ancient wars indeed. And that bad ancient blood has been used, and it's like a wound that you scratch and then it bleeds again. But also, I hope you understand how psychological operations also play into this, and how whatever you see on the mainstream media, whatever you're watching, is controlled. And, I have conversations like the one you heard with me and Buff with a lot of people, former ambassadors, current ambassadors, leaders, just average Joes, historians. And I think it's important that you hear discussions like this, because just because we're talking about topics doesn't mean that we always have to agree. Never, ever, ever, ever. And never, ever, ever, ever is everybody on the same page, because if you did, then we'd all be vanilla. But on that note, I just wanted to reiterate, because I saw a tweet that came out of from Gavin Wins, Millie Weaver's husband, about QAnon. And I thought I would share that with you. That was interesting, because it pretty much explains. He tweets, "My thoughts on Q. Q appears to be a psyop on the psyop community, actively running influence operations on Americans." So who is running influence operations on Americans? The military industrial complex. What is Q doing? They're psyoping the psyopers. That was the whole purpose. Well, the psyop community relies on non-attribution, misattribution. That means to not be connected to basically, if I want to psyop you, you aren't supposed to know that I'm doing it. That's what non-attribution really is. Well, on a more technical term, it's to not be able to find out where the information is coming from, like with trip codes. And so they're freaked out. The military industrial complex is freaked out that Q has unknown superior forms of non-attribution, which means that Q is demonstrating that the military industrial complex is absolutely obsolete. So, again, in my humble analysis, Q was never meant for the people. It was meant for the military industrial complex, for the fourth unelected branch of government, for the shadow government. Yet, in order for Q to be visible, people are the ones that are amplifying it. This is why they're so terrified, because people that have just a little bit of noggin and a want for truth are able to see behind that curtain. And you know what pisses them off? Is that, hey, how are they doing this? We're going to quash it. We're going to find it, because maybe average Joes, loser psyopers, may be allowed to infiltrate purposely. Maybe. This is just a hypothetical situation. So, did I tell you that, you probably heard it, right? That, non-attribution, misattribution is key to all psyops. I mean, remember Patrick Berge was the one that built all the non-attribution networks for the government, for the military-industrial complex. I'm just saying. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's show, which was not telling you about the news today, but kind of telling you about the news today because Pompeo was talking about it yesterday. So it's important that we know just how big of a genius our president really is, right? He doesn't have to make illegal little groups. He doesn't have to do things off the books because he's got you. He's got us. And that's why he's in office, because he's with us. So think about that. Next time someone says whatever about your president, think what a genius he is. Think how the world is literally on fire and he's still around and he's still making them, squish their noses in disgust because he's so awesome. God bless everyone. I will see you tomorrow.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. In my heart I have but one desire, and that one is you. No other will do. I've lost all ambition for worldly acclaim. I just wanna be the one you love. And with your admission, you'd feel the same. I'll have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Believe me, I don't want to set the world on fire. I just wanna start a flame in your heart. I've lost all ambition for worldly acclaim. I just wanna be the one you love. And with your admission, you'd feel the same. I'll have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Believe me, I don't want to set the world on fire. I just wanna start a flame in your heart.